The Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and all members will have 5 days to submit statements, extraneous material, and questions for the record, subject to the length limitations in the rules. To insert something into the record, please have your staff email the previously mentioned address or contact full committee staff. As a reminder to members, please keep your video function on at all times, even when you are not recognized by the chair. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. Consistent with House rules, staff will only mute members as appropriate when they are not under recognition to eliminate background noise. I see that we have a quorum, and I now will recognize myself for opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, a parliamentary inquiry real quick before we get started.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most everybody knows here that I'm a physician, but I'm not sure many people know that I did vaccine research at the U.S. Army Institute of Infectious Disease. And I took keen notice last week that the CDC made the announcement that if vaccinated, a mask isn't needed indoors. And I also noted that Dr. Moynihan's initial response was that they wouldn't be required in committee, yet only a few days after that. And I don't know what made him change his medical advice, but he has now said if we're not speaking, we have to have a mask on in committee. If it's okay with you, I'd like to submit into the record the CDC's guidance on this, which says wearing masks in this setting, if you're vaccinated, is unnecessary. I'd like to submit those into the record if I could, sir.
Without objection.
And then I'd like to also insert into the record articles from the New England Journal of Medicine, 2 of them, as well as one from Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Review, which all 3 very strongly support the conclusion that a mask inside when you're vaccinated is completely unnecessary. With that basis, sir, I would love to ask, will this committee base its decision on the wearing of the mask in the committee on the science or on the policy being pushed from the leadership of the House?
We will be based upon the advice and the science of the Office of the Attending Physician.
Well, I'd like to make a recommendation then, Mr. Chairman, that we ask Dr. Moynihan what caused him to change his opinion 4 days after he said it was okay.
Well, he's the doctor for all of us. I'm sure you can ask him that.
I will do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now will recognize myself for purposes of opening remarks. Pursuant to notice, we meet today to examine the U.S.-Afghanistan relationship following the military withdrawal. Let me start by thanking Special Representative Mr. Khalilzad and Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia at the USAID, Ms. Karen L. Freeman, for testifying today before this committee. I'd also like to thank, as usual, my good friend, the ranking member, McCall, for his partnership in holding today's important hearing and working collectively in that regard to put this together. Thank you, Mr. McCall. You know, in the immediate aftermath of September 11th attacks, our country and the Congress came together to support a military effort to target those who perpetuated those attacks. I was among those members of Congress who, in 2001, voted to send troops to Afghanistan to address the immediate threat Al-Qaeda posed to the United States and our allies around the world. And it's important to remember that we sent these troops to Afghanistan to achieve 2 primary goals. 1, to diminish and disrupt Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and 2, to ensure that Al-Qaeda and other terrorists could not use Afghan soil to plan future terrorist attacks on the United States or our allies. Now, after more than 2 decades of war, we've achieved those objectives, which is why I welcomed President Biden's announcement to withdraw all of our troops from Afghanistan by September 11th of this year. Now, I am fully aware that withdrawing entails risks. But we must also recognize the nature of the threat emanating from Afghanistan. That risk now is dramatically different than it was almost 20 years ago. and that the capability of our armed services, too, has evolved in those 20 years. The Taliban's existence is a fact that we must and we have to deal with, which will require a diplomatic solution, not a military one. And while I understand the resentiments to entrust the Taliban to uphold the commitments it has made on terrorism and Al-Qaeda, we must test their ability to keep that promise. Still, there remains concerns which I share. I am troubled that the withdrawal may mean, or what it may mean, for the future of Afghan women and girls and on human rights. But these challenges on human rights and the constitutional order are not problems that can be solved by the U.S. military. These are challenges that are best addressed by diplomatic and development professionals. Earlier this month, we were reminded of this fact when on May 8th, terrorists bombed a school just as the girls studying there were leaving for the day, killing more than 50 people. Notably, the Taliban publicly condemned this attack, but it is a reminder of that regular threat Afghans live under, whether or not American troops remain on the ground. So I want to make sure that everyone knows I'm clear-eyed about the challenges and the many open questions that remain for me and many Congress on both sides of the aisle about what the withdrawal means for the intra-Afghan peace process, for the rights of women and girls and minorities, and for ensuring for our counterterrorism interests. I hope our witnesses will be able to shed light on the Taliban's views and commitments on protection for diplomats and humanitarian workers. Those individuals will be critical in supporting long-term development in Afghanistan. Efforts that the United States and our international partners have supported for decades and will continue to support for years to come. And I also hope to hear how the United States Agency for International Development plans on continuing its work in the country following the September withdrawal. Unfortunately, the previous administration failed to adequately consult with Congress. And Ambassador Khalilzad has never publicly appeared before this committee until today in his capacity as Special Representative of Afghanistan Reconciliation. So I am pleased you are here now voluntarily, Mr. Ambassador, and I say thanks to the new administration that understands the value of accountability to Congress. I look forward to helping us gain a better understanding of the U.S. approach to Afghanistan now and after withdrawal. I now recognize Mr. McCall for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we share the same concerns as you articulately laid out. And it's all great to see you again. While maybe you haven't appeared in this setting, we've certainly met with you many times and classified and in private meetings. And I just want to thank you for your service to the nation, and not an easy task to negotiate with the Taliban. In fact, I can't imagine what that is like. Last month, President Biden announced all U.S. troops would withdraw from Afghanistan by September the 11th of this year, 20th anniversary of the day Al-Qaeda killed almost 3,000 Americans. Yet the conditions we set for the Taliban have not been met, and there's zero chance the Taliban will abide by their commitments once we remove our leverage by pulling out. In response to the announcement, the Taliban proclaimed they would not participate in the talks in Turkey until all foreign forces have left Afghanistan, indefinitely stalling the peace talks. It seems all but certain the Taliban will try to overrun the country and return it to pre-9/11 state after we have withdrawn. They've already ramped up their attacks, taking new territory and bases since the announcement was made. Without a military presence in country, the U.S. is giving them room to deepen their relationship with terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, who may seek to launch external attacks on us and our allies from the country once again. I've long advocated for a residual force to remain in Afghanistan to address these issues. And I've repeated that conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timelines, should dictate withdrawal. But, Mr. Chairman, as you and I know, the decision's been made. So before withdrawal is complete, the administration must mitigate the fallout and anticipate what will happen when we do withdraw. And that starts with finding ways to fill the gaps in our intelligence collection and counterterrorism capabilities that will be created by this withdrawal. One solution would be to reach agreements with neighboring countries to grant us ISR capabilities so we can continue to identify and eliminate threats before they reach our shores. Maintaining an embassy presence and distributing U.S. assistance will also become close to impossible if Afghanistan slides back into civil war or once again falls under Taliban rule. The President has claimed our humanitarian and development assistance to the country will continue, but he has provided no strategy of how we could continue to provide aid if either of these scenarios happen. And finally, we have an obligation to thousands of Afghans who put themselves in danger to work with and for our military and our diplomats and our special operators. We made commitments to them to issue special immigrant visas to those qualifying heroes for their service to our troops in country. Unfortunately, we have backlogs and other issues that are preventing the process from moving more quickly. We have 18,000 visas backlogged. We have 35 to possibly 50,000 potential applicants. And sir, I believe we need to get them out. We owe a moral responsibility to them to get them out of there before the Taliban kills them. The Taliban has targeted and will continue to target these individuals and their families because they did support our mission. Many will die if the administration doesn't act quickly and safely speed up the visa processing to get these people out before we withdraw. We cannot allow Afghanistan to be another Saigon. This isn't just about the people waiting for these visas in Afghanistan. If our allies and partners don't trust us to keep our word or think they will be abandoned, it could cause irreparable damage to our national security. And I know none of us want to see a repeat of what happened in Iraq, where ISIS raised its ugly head. So as a result, the terrorist threat grew there and forced us to return. I hope that does not happen in this case. And finally, I want to thank you all for your years of service as ambassador, special envoy. I also want to thank my dear friend, Ambassador Roya Romani, the first female ambassador appointed by Afghanistan, who's a fierce champion for her country and is proof that Afghanistan needs female leaders. As the chairman mentioned, we are both really concerned about the safety of Afghan women and girls. We're just seeing a school being blown up with 70 girls killed and 160 wounded. Barbaric. So I think we have a lot on our plate here. You have a very difficult job, as you have for several years. But we want to mitigate the fallout that could come from this decision as much as we possibly can. And Mr. Chairman, I know you and I have talked about this extensively. We had dinner with the ambassador, and I know that I have a trusted partner to work with you to make sure we protect those who fought with us, alongside of us. And as the saying goes, no man, but no one left behind. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. I'd now like to turn to the chair and the ranking member of the Asia Subcommittee for brief prepared remarks. I now yield to Chairman Bera for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know on both sides of the aisle, there are members that agree with the president's decision and members that disagree with the president's decision. But now that the president's made that decision, you know, as the ranking member just mentioned, it behooves us to honor our commitments to those individuals that supported our troops, our mission, our aid workers, our contractors in Afghanistan, because we already see that they're being targeted for assassination. And you know, I look forward to what the witnesses have to say. as the ranking member mentioned, we've already authorized a number of special immigration visas. You know, my home community of Sacramento County has, I believe, the largest population of Afghan refugees, including a number of SIVs. We've got to work on this backlog. We've got to protect these folks. If we have to move them to a third country or to Guam while we do the processing, we have an obligation. And when you talk to our veteran communities, they want us to honor that obligation. So I look forward to the testimony. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. I now yield 1 minute to Ranking Member Shabbat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American people have spent a tremendous amount in blood and treasure in Afghanistan since we went there to ensure that terrorists could no longer use that country to threaten our homeland. President Biden's decision now to pull out jeopardizes the gains we've made towards that goal. And for the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls, it quite likely means, in fairly short order, I'm afraid, a once again nightmarish, slavery-like existence. And in terms of our strategic interests, leaving will create a power vacuum that Russia and China and Iran are certain to fill. One would think that this president and his advisors would have learned from the disastrous results of pulling all military personnel from Iraq, which led to the rise of ISIS and the near fall of all of Iraq, had we not gone back in to clean up the mess. Not before, of course, the brutal torture, beheadings, crucifixion of Christians, and all-around bloodbath cost the lives of so many innocent human beings, men, women, and children. Will the Taliban once again take over? Unfortunately, we're going to know soon enough, and quite likely end up having to go back in all over again. And I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Shabbat. Now I'll introduce our distinguished witnesses. Special Representative on Afghanistan Reconciliation, Zalmay Khalilzad. Ambassador Khalilzad was appointed by Secretary Pompeo as the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation on September 21, 2018. Previously, Ambassador Khalilzad served as U.S. Permanent Representative to the United Nations from 2007 through 2009, Ambassador to Iraq 2005 through 2007, and Ambassador to Afghanistan from 2003 to 2005. Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia at the USAID, Karen L. Freeman, is the minister. She's a career minister with the U.S. Foreign Service. Ms. Freeman was previously the assistant to the administrator for the Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs. Before that, she was the senior deputy assistant administrator for the Bureau of Democracy, Conflict, and Humanitarian Assistance. And prior to that, she served as mission director to the United States Agency for International Development in Kenya and East Africa Mission. So without objection, all of the witnesses' prepared testimony will be made part of the record, and I now recognize the witnesses for 5 minutes each to summarize their testimony. Mr. Khalilzad, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. For the record, I have appeared both in closed and open hearings, and I've been willing to do so. It's a great honor to be here, Ranking Member McCall. It's a great pleasure to see you and distinguished members of the committee. I welcome the opportunity to talk with you today about America's strategy in Afghanistan and to update you on my recent discussions with partners in Kabul, the Taliban in Doha, and regional and international stakeholders. As you know, President Biden made the decision to withdraw the remaining U.S. forces from Afghanistan, beginning on May 1 and concluding by September 11th. With the departure of our forces underway, we are entering a new phase in our partnership with Afghanistan. Our objectives for this new phase are to first safely withdraw our remaining forces while leaving Afghan forces in the best position possible to defend themselves. 2, promote a political settlement that ends Afghanistan's long war and oppose the imposition of a government by force. 3, prevent Afghanistan from becoming a platform for terrorists threatening the United States and our allies. 4, and promote regional cooperation, including connectivity, trade, and economic development to shift the country to a peacetime mindset and give the region a stake in Afghanistan's success. To advance these objectives, we are building international support for a political settlement that would have broad support in Afghanistan. 2, encouraging unity among Afghan leaders on the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan side. 3, sustaining military, political, and economic support for the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. 4, incentivizing the Taliban to reduce violence, accelerate negotiations for a political settlement, and agree to a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire. 5, strengthening our cooperation against terrorism with countries in the region through enhanced monitoring and response capabilities. And 6, promoting economic connectivity, trade, and development between Central Asia, Afghanistan, and South Asia. Mr. Chairman, the Taliban face a fundamental choice between two very different futures. They can embrace a negotiated path to peace, make the transition from a violent insurgency to a political movement, and be part of a nation that enjoys respect in the global community. But if they pursue a military takeover, they will face isolation, regional and international opposition, sanctions, and our allies' support for Afghan security forces will continue. We appreciate Qatar's hosting of inter-Afghan negotiations. We are working closely with the United Nations to enhance its role, which is important, one, due to its experience and expertise on matters such as ceasefire and process design. We welcome the United Nations, Turkey's, and Qatar's willingness to co-convene a high-level negotiations in Istanbul. The parties need to agree to a date as soon as possible, and we expect them to come prepared with concrete proposals. The opportunities are in place. The international will to assist is robust, and both Afghan government leaders and the Taliban need to do their part to ensure this historic moment is not lost. Pakistan has an important role to play. We remain in close touch with Pakistan's leaders, pressing them to exercise their considerable leverage over the Taliban to reduce violence and support a negotiated settlement. I believe Pakistan understands that the protracted war in Afghanistan is not in its interest. As you know, we have already begun the process of withdrawing our forces in close coordination with our NATO allies and partners. The withdrawal so far has taken place without major incident, and we expect this to continue. However, we are prepared to respond forcefully if attacked, and I've made this clear. We are working with our regional and international partners who all have a stake in a peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan. We recently had productive meetings with Russia, China, and Pakistan, and separately with our European allies, and released powerful joint statements calling on the two Afghan sides to reduce violence and engage seriously in negotiations, and on the Taliban not to pursue a spring offensive. All our partners have made clear that a peaceful Afghan nation resulting from negotiations and compromise and not from force can count on material assistance, support, and mutually beneficial relationship. With the support of Congress, we are committed to maintaining substantial security assistance through the Afghan Security Force Fund. Our NATO allies and partners are likewise committed to stand with Afghanistan its people and its institutions, and in promoting security. We have heard justifiable concerns regarding the safety of the thousands of Afghans, and I heard it today, who have worked with our diplomats and soldiers over the past 20 years. As Secretary Blinken has made it clear, we are working hard to ensure that we have expedited considerations for those at risk. At the same time, we must not assume the inevitability of a worst-case outcome. Our goal should be an Afghanistan in which all the country's people can live in peace and security. Ideally, Afghans who have acquired education, skills, and international experience will form the backbone of a new economy and prosperity for a peaceful Afghanistan. Strong measures must be taken to ensure that the value of these individuals is recognized and their retaliatory acts are forsworn. This will be an integral and essential part of the peace talks and of our own discussions with the Taliban. We will continue to advocate preserving the gains for minorities and for women, of course, including their meaningful participation in the ongoing negotiations and their representation in society and politics. This is something I've worked hard on during my time as ambassador and in my current capacity. And the significant progress achieved must not be lost. The Taliban should also understand that the Afghanistan of today is very different than it was 20 years ago. We are reconfiguring our counterterrorism capabilities to ensure our ability to monitor and address threats emanating from Afghanistan. We will maintain assets in the region and will continue to work closely with Afghan counterparts. We are developing opportunities for enhanced cooperation with regional partners who share our concern and are open to cooperation. We will hold the Taliban accountable to their commitments to prevent Al-Qaeda and ISIS or any other terrorist group from using Afghanistan as a base for attacks against us. Please note that the release and safe return home of Mark Frederick, who has been held as a hostage since 2020, is very important to Secretary Blinken and to me. Secretary Blinken has raised Mark's safe returns repeatedly with his counterparts in the region. And in my meeting with the Taliban, I have demanded his release. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous loss following the recent attacks on a girls' school near Kabul. This was a deeply shocking incident. It appears that ISIS was responsible, but ultimately, it is the ongoing violence and chaos that makes such attacks possible. It bears repeating, and I think it's important to remember, that what the United States did for Afghanistan over the past 2 decades has been extraordinary and motivated by goodwill and honorable goals. Our men and women in uniform have sacrificed their lives, and thousands now live with permanent physical and other disabilities as a result of their service. We have invested massively in the effort to develop a society far from our own, not just because terrorists planned 9/11 there, but also because we cared about the plights of millions of women and girls, about a fledgling civil society that now has grown into a viable entity, about ethnic and religious minorities, and about replacing extremism with peace. We want our investments and sacrifices to have been worthwhile. And if we can navigate the coming months appropriately, I believe this can happen. We want an enduring partnership with Afghanistan. In the end, it's up, of course, to the Afghans to seize their opportunities. Our troops deserve to come home, and Afghanistan deserves a chance to find its way forward with help and encouragement from its friends. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Chairman, for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now recognize Ms. Freeman for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meeks, Ranking Member McCall, members of the committee, thank you very much for the invitation to come here and discuss with you today the U.S.-Afghanistan relationship following President Biden's announcement last month to withdraw all U.S. military forces from Afghanistan by September 11th, 2021. It's an honor for me to testify before you and a pleasure to be alongside my colleague, Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad.
Mr. Chairman, could the speaker pull the mic a little closer?
Okay. I'd like to start by thanking our military colleagues, the brave women and the men in uniform who have served in Afghanistan and their families. Our gratitude goes also to the American and international civilians who serve in Afghanistan, USAID's foreign service officers and development professionals, diplomats of the United States Department of State, colleagues from across the interagency, and the men and women working shoulder to shoulder with us to implement U.S. programs in the country. I would also like to thank the thousands of Afghans who work and sacrifice alongside us to ensure their country's future is one filled with increased access to opportunity, enhanced stability, and a hopeful tomorrow for their children. Furthermore, I want to recognize the many who have given their lives in service to our great country, protecting what we hold dear, our freedom, our values, our way of life. Each one of you has our gratitude. President Biden made it explicitly clear, as did Secretary Blinken, that as defense draws down, diplomacy and development must come to the forefront. The U.S. will stand with the Afghan people through diplomacy and development assistance as they work towards a prosperous future. I want to make it very clear to the committee, to our Afghan partners, international donors, and the American people that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, will continue to support the Afghan people. The troop withdrawal announcement has not changed USAID's objectives to support the dignity of the Afghan people. Our development assistance has accelerated inclusive economic growth, advanced social gains in health, education, and gender equality, fought corruption, enhanced conflict resolution mechanisms, bolstered civil society and an independent media, and increased the government of Afghanistan's accountability to its own citizens. USAID provides humanitarian assistance for those most in need, including women, girls, and displaced populations. USAID provides assistance in insecure environments all over the world. In Afghanistan, we are actively planning for a range of scenarios in which we would continue to providing development assistance. Across this entire planning process, we are emphasizing the need to protect the gains made to date, support food security, and strengthen essential services for Afghan citizens. USAID will continue to review its programs, understand the constraints, determine the best way forward in helping to maintain a stable Afghan state. The mission will pivot development programming to augment humanitarian assistance as necessary to respond to security and access changes in the operating environment and increase basic service delivery, livelihood opportunities, food security, and human rights protection. As Ambassador Khalilzad reflected, the Afghanistan of 2021 is a very different place from 2002. USAID has invested $22 billion in development assistance in Afghanistan since 2002 to promote a more resilient, inclusive, and prosperous Afghanistan that is a reliable partner to the United States in the region. Today, citizens of Afghanistan are more involved in their own future. They are healthier, have more access to education, are more prosperous, and enjoy greater freedoms than 2 decades ago. The United States will remain Afghanistan's steadfast partner. USAID, together with our development partners, has been clear in sending a no business as usual message to the government of Afghanistan and the Taliban alike. We have emphasized the need for adherence to key international principles, including protecting human rights, particularly those of women and girls, and underscored the need to continue upholding these same principles as a condition for continued support. Gains have been hard-won, earned with great sacrifice and effort from the United States and the Afghan people. Afghanistan's trajectory matters to American national interest. We appreciate Congress's recognition that USAID's development programs are critical to achieving U.S. national security objectives and help to improve the prosperity and security of the United States, Afghanistan, and our regional partners. It's an honor today to be with you and share what USAID is doing in this regard. I thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and thank Ambassador Khalilzad also. I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each, and pursuant to the House rules, all time yielded is for the purpose of questioning our witnesses. I will recognize members by committee seniority, alternating between Democrats and Republicans. If you miss your turn, please let our staff know and we will come back to you. If you seek recognition, you must unmute your microphone and address the chair verbally and identify yourself so that we know who is speaking. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Let me, Ambassador Khalilzad, let me ask you, I just want to be clear. There is a question of whether or not you were able to negotiate a commitment from the Taliban to separate from Al-Qaeda. Did you negotiate that or not?
I negotiated that.
Mike, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Our agreement specifies that the Taliban will not host, will not allow training, will not allow fundraising, will not allow recruitment of terrorists, including Al-Qaeda, that would threaten the security of the United States and our allies.
So, of those commitments, what would you say the Taliban has done or demonstrated that it is upholding them or not?
Mr. Chairman, what I can say in this setting is that they have made substantial progress in delivering on those commitments, but we would like to see more.
Okay, and that same, and what causes the concern that I think that you've heard from both Mr. McCall and myself, there's concern by us and many others that the social and political gains will be reversed if the Taliban does not live up to its commitments and come back into power following the U.S. military withdrawal. So my question, are there any insights that you can share with us about the Taliban's plans for governance, whether they will share or not, or whether their views on women, girls, and minority rights, have they evolved at all, or are they the same where they were 20 years ago?
Mr. Chairman, we share your concerns. The Taliban understand that what they do on these issues will determine whether, if they are part of the future government, whether Afghanistan will receive the assistance from the international community that the Taliban say they seek. They say they seek normalcy in terms of relations, acceptability, removal from sanctions, not to be remain a pariah. They have said to me that their views have evolved. They have expressed themselves on positively on securing Afghanistan's historic heritage, although we know that the last time they were in power, the Bamyan Buddhas were blown up, an important Afghan heritage. They say the Afghan women have rights, including political participation, education, and work. We will have to see. Their statements indicate that as if they have learned, as if they have evolved, but we don't take their word for it. We will have to see what happens if there is a political settlement, if they are part of the future government, how they behave. But we have made it clear that our future assistance, our future relations will be influenced, shaped by what they do if they become part of the future government.
Thank you. Ms. Freeman, let me just ask, does the USAID have any goals, or do they intend to support initiatives focused on protecting the hard-won gains of women, girls, and other minority groups in Afghanistan after withdrawal?
Without a doubt, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. USAID has, since 2002, invested almost $270 million in Afghanistan's girls' education and economic empowerment, and we will continue to support women's access to education, economic, and political participation. Moreover, we have worked with civil society to strengthen their voices, to allow them to participate in the process, and to become a part of the negotiating team in the peace process. We'll continue to in fact, we just authorized 2 new programs on strengthening women's economic skills and participation in the economy, and also in another one in strengthening their skills in leading and guiding civil society organizations.
Thank you for that. My time has expired. Now we'll recognize the ranking member, McCall, for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Zoe, we've been talking about this for a while. It seems to me they have launched their spring offensive now in northern and southern Afghanistan. They have hit Afghan bases. They've hit our base in Kandahar. They blew up the school with the girls, and and they canceled any future meetings indefinitely. Is that correct?
Thank you. I can't agree with everything that has just been postulated. I don't believe that they blew up the school. As I said in my prepared testimony, it's likely to be ISIS, right, which is seeking to disrupt any potential peace process. And the Talibs have been fighting ISIS forcefully, which is a positive. With regard to the spring offensive, yes, the level of violence is too high. They did declare a ceasefire for Eid, which has ended. That was positive. The government reciprocated. With regard to negotiations, the leader of the group or the Taliban office in Doha visited with the Afghan negotiating team during Eid, and they are set to, according to what he said, to restart negotiations in the coming days after, as part of the group that is visiting Pakistan returns. There are several initiatives underway to.
So I understand you believe you will have another meeting in Doha.
That's what the Talib, the Mullah Brother, the deputy leader.
I don't know what
Taliban
leverage
said.
we really have over them anymore. That's my concern. And I know you've done the best job you can do. I want to read you, I get these texts from friends of mine, special forces guys. He says, this Afghan commando is like a little brother to me. 12 years he worked as an operator alongside Green Berets and SEAL Team 6. The Taliban know his name. If he doesn't get an SIV, he will be assassinated. This irresponsibly executed exit from Afghanistan will have dire consequences for many of our friends. In response to many of these, the chairman and I sent a letter to the secretary asking him to address this issue of special immigrant visas. I know this may be a little not quite your line of responsibility, but I would just take this opportunity to urge the administration to expedite, but I don't know how we can do it by September. And we may have to consider airlifting out of Bagram to a safer country like the UAE, Bahrain, or Kuwait, where we can process these claims. Otherwise, I'm concerned that his prediction is, and many predictions will come true, and these people will be slaughtered by the Taliban. With the limited time I have, and if you have a comment to that, I would appreciate.
We share, of course, your concern. We are expanding our capacity in the region to expedite. But I also am, as I have said repeatedly, you and I have talked about it, we don't want to signal panic and the departure of all educated Afghans by worst casing and undermining the morale of the Afghan security forces. So this is a delicate, complicated balance that we have to keep, but we share, Ranking Member, your concern and the Chairman's concern, and we're
And thank you. I
we're
got 1 minute.
expanding our
Ms.
capacity.
Freeman, I'm also worried about the embassy. You know, we saw what happened in Saigon. We had Benghazi. I don't know the force protection level if it's adequate. Now, I've been talking to our colleagues on Appropriations Committee about the Diplomatic Security Corps mission. Do we need more funding for the embassy? If the embassy fails, we have no presence in country at all, and your ability to carry out USAID's mission would not be possible. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, of course, on diplomatic security, I'd have to defer to the Department of State. USAID relies in Kabul on diplomatic security for our own security, and we would follow the directions of the Chief of Mission, whatever those were, with respect to our presence there. I guess the one thing that I would comment on in terms of our ability and our partnership is that we have programs across the country that we implement with international organizations, Afghan organizations. All of those are in constant communication with our own team in Kabul. And we review and
I know my time's expired, but I know the process. If you don't have an embassy, you can't carry out your mission.
I would remind you that prior to the presence of the troops in Afghanistan, that we were implementing programs in Afghanistan.
Well, and hopefully that will continue. It'll be very dangerous.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Brad Sherman of California for 5 minutes.
Sometimes a slogan is more powerful than an army, and the slogan is a forever war. We can't stay in Afghanistan because of that phrase. America does not want to be in a forever war. Our casualties in Afghanistan now are modest enough that if we would continue, if they did not remind us of the thousands we lost in prior decades. And so we seem to be planning for a more orderly version of Saigon 1975. Ambassador Khalilzad, the question I have is how are we, what leverage do we have in bargaining with the Taliban? One way to view our leverage is that the Afghan government is a powerful, viable force, that it will get aid from the United States, that it will hold substantial territory, and accordingly they need to negotiate a more moderate regime. The other view is that the Taliban will be in total military control, but they should moderate to some degree in order to get the economic benefits of being in total control of really on the ground what happens in Afghanistan, but they'd get aid and trade with the United States. I'm pointing out that a Taliban regime would probably have good relations with all its neighbors, China, Russia, Iran, and Pakistan. They could, use some aid and trade with the United States. Is the military viability of the Afghan government something the Taliban takes seriously, or are any concessions they make to us is simply to obtain the economic benefits that come with not being a pariah in our eyes.
Thank you very much for that question. Of course, the casualties are low now, and thank goodness we have had no fatalities since February of last year, and that's because of the agreement with the Taliban. And one of the factors that shaped the president's decision, in my judgment, is the prospects of returning back to war with the Talibs. With regard to your observations incentivizing the Talibs, you're obviously quite right. I personally believe that the predictions that the Afghan forces will collapse right away, they're not right. We are helping them now. We will help them. This is our commitment.
Ambassador, if I could insert one other question, that is, under the agreement and under our plan,
right.
Are we going to be providing billions of dollars of military aid, and are American contracting firms legally allowed to be there, for example, to help the Afghan Air Force?
Well, we are committed. We have stated it, and that we will continue with our security assistance to the Afghan forces. The forces are popular. They are a source of pride for the Afghans. Even the Taliban have said they don't want the disintegration of the Afghan security forces. As far as the contractors, we are looking at helping Afghans be able to maintain and operate their capabilities that they have. We're looking at the options both in Afghanistan and beyond. But I also want to add to your very good list 2 other points that incentivize the Talibs. So one being they fear a long war, and if they pursue, in my judgment, a military victory, it will result in a long war.
They've been saying some of the right words, and you're nodding, so I think that's the case. They're saying some of the right things, but then you said, we'll have to see. Now, isn't it correct that they've taken over other parts of the country in recent times, especially as we've been drawing down our forces? They've been taken over gradually here, actually more rapidly than gradually. And we have seen what they've done in those places, and my understanding is it's as ugly as it's always been. So we've seen by their actions what they've done when they're in control. So why in the world would we think it would be any different for those women and girls if they did successfully take over the country? Now, don't actions speak louder than words?
Well, you do make a good point with regard to the areas that they have taken, but I would like to put a footnote to that, which is that their performance on girls and women differs from one area to another, both of which they would control. In areas that are peaceful and more developed, and their policies tend to be more tolerant, more favorable in terms of rights of women for education and access to medical care, to work. In areas that are more war-torn and more undeveloped or underdeveloped, their policies and their practices are worse. But I share your concern, Congressman. Let there be no mistake for what happened to women and girls in Afghanistan.
Thank you.
But I also want to tell you that the women of Afghanistan, by and large, and as long as men would like to see the war end, they fear for the continuation of war.
Well, I agree. We all want the war to end, but Yeah, I'd hate to have my existence dependent on a footnote, and I think, unfortunately, that's the literal lives and conditions of the women and girls there, I think, are what we're talking about that's so significant, and we should never lose sight of that. Let me move to something else. One of the reasons that the President, the administration, has cited for leaving Afghanistan is so that it would allow us to focus on more serious threats like China. With the U.S. gone, however, China and Russia will be able to exert greater influence in Afghanistan, and let's face it, throughout Central Asia. I don't think there's any question about that. Was that possibility discussed during the administration's discussion of the Afghanistan policy review, and why wasn't that given more weight? What's going to happen in the overall region if we pull out?
I think the review was quite comprehensive. It took a long time. There was also the consideration that the Russians and the Chinese and others are beneficiary of our presence in Afghanistan. The challenges of Afghanistan threatens everyone's interest, terrorism, for example, and that they were free riders in a sense, with the U.S. doing the bulk of the effort with our allies. We would like Russia and China and Iran and Pakistan and the entire international community. We have a consensus that a peaceful settlement in an Afghanistan that doesn't pose a threat to anyone is a worthwhile objective, and our diplomacy has been focused on developing that consensus, and I have to say we've made substantial progress in that regard.
Thank you, and I'm almost out of time, and I have the utmost respect for you, and I know you've dealt with this in the best of faith, and you have a great track record, but I'm very concerned that when we're out of there, the Taliban's going to take over, and it's going to be disastrous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Albio Sires of New Jersey, who's the chair of the Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere, Civilian Security, Migration, and International Economic Policy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Ambassador, you have served as ambassador to both Iraq and Afghanistan. Can you tell me why this withdrawal from Afghanistan will be different from the withdrawal from Iraq?
Well, I have to say for the record that I was not supporting that withdrawal from Iraq at that time. Given the alternatives we faced, the president made the decision that he did. It doesn't have to be like what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, the departure intensified Shia-Sunni conflict, as a result of which ISIS gained greater ground. Here, I believe that the Talibs are a formidable force against ISIS. And they have done a reasonably good job in taking ISIS on. We don't see a military solution to the war. It's a different kind of war than what we had in Iraq. And we all admit to that. There is no one who has come and said persuasively that there is a military solution. If we did the same thing that we've done for the next 5 years, 10 years, we will get up to a political settlement that we could win. So given that and the desire on the part of the president to leave, this is the best option available under the circumstances. And we will do what I have described in response.
So what lessons have we learned that can be applied here in the from the Iraq drawdown to Afghanistan?
Well, the lesson from not only the Iraq, but also more broadly, in terms of withdrawals, from combat similar to the situation in Afghanistan is to keep our eyes on the ball, meaning sustained support. A great concern is that with the departure of our forces, that Congress will not sustain support for the Afghan security forces. And I hope that won't be the case. And certainly the administration is committed to providing security assistance. Second, to do what we're trying to do to implement that if the threat grows, we have to be able to monitor it. There will be some degradation of our capabilities in terms of monitoring and response with the withdrawal, but the threat is also lower, but we are trying to maintain capabilities and reach new agreements for additional capabilities in the area so that we can respond in time, be adaptable as the situation changes.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Sayers yields back. I now recognize Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and Global Counterterrorism for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Greg Meeks, for your positive leadership. And I share the concerns of Congressman Albiol-Sires. Our sympathy to the people of Afghanistan. Last Saturday, a murderous, heinous car bombing in Kabul killed dozens of girls. The intentional targeting of girls should be inconceivable, but it was the deliberate aim of fanatical totalitarians who are obsessed with also murdering American families. Sadly, the reality of the global war on terrorism is we must defeat terrorists overseas or they will return to attack American families. I am very grateful for the South Carolina Army National Guard, led by General Bob Livingston, and also for the service of my youngest son, Hunter Wilson, an engineer, who served for a year in Afghanistan to assist the people of Afghanistan. I appreciate the insight of Congressman Mike McCall and former Ambassador Ryan Crocker in their May 4, 2021 op-ed in the New York Times, and I would like to move to include this in the record, American Families at Risk. I so move. Additionally, Ambassador Khalzad, what is your assessment of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces capacity to conduct counterterrorism operations and provide security to the Afghan people after a complete troop withdrawal?
Thank you very much, and I applaud your son and thank him for his service. And the article was a good one. Thank you for mentioning it. As far as the Afghan security forces are concerned, they have significant counter-terror capabilities in various parts of their security forces, and we will work with them in support of our common objective of counterterrorism. With regard to the security forces writ large, vis-a-vis the war against the Taliban, if the Taliban should decide not to negotiate for peace but continue the war, of course, it will depend on, among other things, on what we do going forward, continuing with support, and we're determined to do that. There is obviously alternative scenarios. I personally believe that the statements that the forces will disintegrate and the Talibs will take over in short order are mistaken. The real choices that the Afghans will face is between a long war and negotiated settlement. And I hope the Taliban and the other Afghan leaders make the right choice. I hope those with influence over the Taliban, such as Pakistan, do the right thing. And we are pressing them to do that. Sorry.
Ambassador, indeed, I'm hopeful as you are, but I'm very concerned. Additionally, I share the concerns of Chairman Greg Meeks, and that is that the Congressional Research Service this week has reported that Al-Qaeda is still assessed to have presence in Afghanistan, and its decades-long ties to the Taliban appear to have been continued and remained strong in recent years. In May 2020, the UN sanctions monitored reported that the senior Taliban leaders, quote, regularly consult, end of quote, with their AQ counterparts. In general, the United States government assessments indicate that the Taliban are not fulfilling their counterterrorism commitments concerning Al-Qaeda. For example, its report in the final quarter of 2020, the Office of the Inspector General of the Departments of Defense, it was relayed an assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, that the Taliban maintain ties to Al-Qaeda and that some Al-Qaeda leaders are integrated into the Taliban forces and command structure. What is your view about the level, again, of Al-Qaeda influence within the Taliban?
Al-Qaeda has been degraded substantially in Afghanistan. It's not what it was during 9/11 or soon thereafter. And the threat has changed. I would like to discuss this in great detail in a closed hearing. I think there is, overall, what I can say in this setting is the Talibs have delivered significantly, substantially on their commitments. We are not satisfied, and we're pressing them. We hold them accountable for the commitments they have made. But we also are not just relying on what the Talibs are saying. Although we hold them accountable, we will take the steps necessary in terms of the presence in the region, monitoring and response capability. Hard work is going on that, I can assure you.
Thank you for monitoring. I yield back. Thank you very
Gentleman's
much.
time has expired. I now recognize Representative Jerry Connolly of Virginia, who's the president of the NATO Parliamentarian Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, both of our witnesses, for being here. Ambassador Khalilzad, certainly admire the work you've put in to a very vexing and difficult and prolonged engagement in Afghanistan. But as somebody who lived through the peace negotiations led by Henry Kissinger and Liu to end the Vietnam War for the United States, this has some eerie resemblances, to be honest. It seems that the American game is to cut its losses and leave and hope for the best, but not our problem. The problem is, because of this engagement, just like Vietnam, we're leaving behind hundreds of thousands of Afghans who relied on us, trusted us for their security. They bought into the proposition that women would be empowered because we'd protect it. They wouldn't be subject to punitive behavior by malign forces like the Taliban. Remembering just how strict and brutal their enforcement of their medieval view of religious stricture was. You have said, Mr. Ambassador, that you believe it's false to assert or to even suggest that the Afghan military, the Afghan government would collapse once we withdrew and the Taliban would prevail. But on what basis do you make such an assertion? Where is the evidence of that? I mean, just a week or two ago, I believe another province close to the capital in Kabul fell to the Taliban. The proximity of that province to the nation's capital hardly is a confidence-building event for those who do hope the Afghan military, in which we've spent billions of dollars and endless training and recruitment, seems not up to the task, by the way, just like Vietnam. The same kind of assurances were given that, no, we're leaving behind a Vietnamese army that is more than capable of dealing with both the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and that proved to be a horrible, feckless fiction. So can you give us more specifics on why you are so confident that suggestions that the Taliban would prevail are, well, maybe the spirit in which you offered is not so fast. There's another side to this. Give us the other side that would give us some confidence to believe that would not be the outcome, and that millions of people, including women, half the population, won't be victims yet again of Taliban brutality.
Well, thank you for that observation. I believe that our ability to predict, we have to be somewhat humble. Even in the Vietnam context, some of the predictions about dominoes falling if Vietnam did not turned out to be right. And Vietnam also...
excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, that was a political theory. I'm talking about military capability.
I'll come to that too. And second, that these things are very complex and depend on a lot of factors, what happens, including whether we do what we commit to doing. And so an argument can be made that Vietnam did not work out the way we had hoped because we cut off assistance to them. I believe there are alternative futures for Afghanistan, and those futures depend on the choices that the Afghans make. We have given them the best circumstances possible, and also depends on what we do going forward and others do. Again, I keep coming to this proposition, what is the alternative? Is the alternative to keep doing what we have been doing for another 10, 20 years? If you see that there is no way you can prevail?
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. My time is up. I just want to say I respect you.
Thank you.
But there's not a word you just said that gives me any confidence in the belief that we leave behind a resilient, strong, surviving government. Thank you.
And I think that's prudent to be skeptical. I'm not here to say I know. I've been around long enough to know that the ability to predict has its limitations, but it's a contingent. We should be contingent.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I must say, I hope the record reflects that for maybe the first time in my life, I agree with my good friend from Virginia, Mr. Connolly. Sadly, well, not that we agree, but over the issue. That having been said, Mr. Ambassador, for the sake of clarity, I wish to point out a statement that Secretary Austin mentioned last month, and that is that the U.S. will continue to fund the Afghan Air Force and Special Mission Wing, as well as supply funds to pay the salaries of the Afghan security forces. Mr. Ambassador, is there any indication that the administration will continue to fund these institutions in the event that the Taliban becomes the governing authority in Afghanistan?
I think the Secretary was talking with regard to the Republic at this point.
Sure, but so is it a fait accompli? Is it to be assumed, or is it somewhere? Is it written somewhere that that if the Taliban does become the governing body, that those payments will end, or are we to depend on the good graces of bureaucrats and politicians that obfuscate? Is it somewhere assured, or must we ask?
I believe that should the Taliban be part of the future government, that decisions will have to be made by the United States in that context. No decision has been made in that regard.
All right, so it's open-ended, so we have to watch if the Taliban does, in fact, take over, whether it's in a day or 2 months or 3 years. The American taxpayer sure doesn't want to be paying for that stuff, but it'll take proactive action on our part, if not the administration's. With that, Ambassador, donations by Western countries presently constitute anywhere between 75 to 85% of the Afghan government's budget. You know, the Taliban has expanded and extended its territorial claims that we haven't seen since 2000 or 2001. Do you envision a scenario in which donations from Western countries will be used to subsidize a future Taliban regime? Will Western countries continue to subsidize the Afghan government at the same level, or really any level, if it becomes the Taliban government of Afghanistan?
We have said repeatedly by the previous administration and this one that our future assistance will depend on the future government in Afghanistan and its policies. So there's no decision that has been made with regard to future alternatives and what we would do in terms of assistance. It just depends what that alternative is and what the policies would be.
Well, let me ask you this. What I'm most concerned about is, while I agree that we don't want to stay there and doing the same thing over and over again is going to not glean any different results, I am concerned with pulling up lock, stock, and barrel without a counterterrorism element in country. I think there are 10 or 11 countries bordering Afghanistan, of which none at this point have offered us any basing rights for immediate action. What do you see as if you know, what's the administration doing, and what do you understand the current prospects are regarding some kind of counterterrorism basing in neighboring countries or in Afghanistan itself as we pull out the majority of forces?
What the administration's policy is, and it's being in the process of being implemented, is to have capabilities in the area to be able to monitor developments in Afghanistan and to have the response capabilities to be able to act on the information should that be necessary.
Well, I think we all, or most of us, agree with that assessment. I know that's what they're seeking. What do you think the prospects are? Are we making any headway that you can inform members of this committee and the American people in that regard?
What I can say in this format, sir, is that several countries in the area are open to enhanced cooperation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I want to ask first, Ms. Freeman, I think we all recognize that women, girls, and religious minorities, journalists, and the LGBTQI community all risk increased persecution without sufficient safeguards. And I think we're all interested in obviously avoiding a precipitous decline in human rights following the withdrawal of Americans and allied military personnel. And I wondered if you might speak to how the withdrawal of personnel might increase the likelihood that funds that are earmarked for women and girls and democracy promotion in Afghanistan are primarily spent on those efforts and not spent on security, and how can we ensure that assistance ultimately leads to programs that foster advancement for women, girls, and other populations left behind in Afghan society, and what we might do to kind of ensure that that's the case?
USAID has long supported the efforts to empower women and girls, and would continue to do so in the future scenarios. So the funding that is earmarked for women and girls and education and health would continue to go towards those ends. Both in partnership with our colleagues at the World Bank and the rest of the donor community. I think we have made a very strong statement that the priority of women and girls' well-being is something that is that cannot be trespassed in terms of governance in Afghanistan. As far as oversight and monitoring of those and making sure that they go to those organizations, USAID has had a very robust monitoring and evaluation system And as I said in my opening remarks, I think that we just started 2 new activities to really focus on economic empowerment and also civic empowerment for women and girls. And those are being implemented by us directly with organizations in Afghanistan. And so to the degree that we can operate, we will operate those programs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, thank you also for your testimony and for setting forth the objectives with respect to Afghanistan. I know there's been some discussion in our hearing about the influence of actors in the region like the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, and I'm just wondering whether or not you have a sense as to whether or not those foreign actors are, in fact, influencing the negotiations between factions in Afghanistan, and if so, to what end? And secondly, given that we think many of us believe that American assistance will remain vital in preserving the stability within Afghanistan, how can we ensure that the resources that we provide fund worthwhile endeavors and don't end up in the pocket of corrupt government officials, which unfortunately we've seen a lot of in the region? So it's a 2-part question, not necessarily related to each other.
Well, thank you, sir. With regard to the Chinese-Russian policies in Afghanistan, they have been on the peace process, and that's what I deal with, in encouraging negotiations between the Taliban and the Afghan government, with precluding a military takeover by the Taliban, restoration and precluding the restoration of the emirate that governed Afghanistan during the Taliban. They have been on the same page with us. I have a lot of skepticism about their policies otherwise, but on this diplomatic effort, they have issued very strong joint statements with us, and they have been issued publicly, and in the last few months, we have had 2 good statements in which China and Russia have participated on the peace process. With regard to the future of assistance, yes, that's a concern. I mean, corruption is a big problem right now. Governance has been, the problems of governance has been one of the challenges that has brought us to where we are, with the difficult options that the president faced and a tough decision that he ultimately made. And it will continue to be perhaps even a greater problem in some alternative futures. So you're raising a great concern, and the oversight issue is very important. That's why we want to maintain a strong embassy to be able to do the oversight of assistance. There will be no blank check in terms of the future of assistance.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Dara Issa of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Ambassador. It's we both have gotten older in the last 20 years, haven't we? As have I. In these 20 years, having entered Congress before we went into Afghanistan, I've watched each and every president, each and every administration be unable to stop several things, and I just want to go over them quickly and get your assessment of what's going to happen going forward. Obviously, the corruption, the wanton theft, including each of the presidents of the country, they've all become billionaires in some bank somewhere, or in some cases, looted banks. And I'm going to make the assumption that if we leave, we're not going to do any better on stopping that. So one of the questions obviously will be, if we couldn't stop it when we were there, how much are we going to put in that is going to end up in Swiss banks? That'd be one question. The second one is, during this entire tenure of 20 years, we've watched our ability to have positive influence on Pakistan and Pakistan having positive influence on Afghanistan go from bad to worse. Would you agree?
Well, first on the corruption issue is a major problem, although
You hope for better?
Cannot associate myself with the presidents becoming billionaires. I just let the record show, since I deal with them, that
Well, I was speaking in the past, but past and present, you know,
Yes.
you never know. The private aircraft that they own usually don't show up till after their former presidents.
Yeah. But corruption is a big problem, and you're right to be concerned that it will continue. And as I said, in some scenarios it could get worse. So that's why oversight and monitoring is important. That doesn't mean that some of the critical assistance needs that serves our interest as well as their interest should not continue, but we have to keep this challenge very much in mind.
Wanting to do that, and I asked you first because I was going to go to Ms. Friedman, today with comparatively good transparency of her program where we can oversee the NGOs that execute, once our troops leave, will we not, by definition, be one step further removed? Our embassy will have less freedom of movement than they do today. Wouldn't that be one of the challenges you're going to face?
It certainly could be. And we have had challenges with regard to the implementation of programs in the last 20 years. As when I was ambassador, our USAID colleagues couldn't go to inspect the projects they were doing, whether a road was actually being built, whether a school was actually being built, or what we were
Whether
told
there was
that
anything inside the walls of a school that was being built.
these are obviously challenges that given the circumstances in which we had to operate at that time. So this is one of the permanent kind of problems in environments such as Afghanistan.
So, Ms. Friedman, what are the tools now, and we'll be optimistic that the Taliban doesn't retake control and usurp what you already have, but under the current situation, what will be the challenges and how will you overcome those challenges in trying to assist all Afghans in developing their country?
Thank you, sir, for your question. I'm sitting here grinning while you're asking it, saying please. I'm particularly proud of the fact that USAID has taken on very seriously across the board, but particularly in Afghanistan and particularly in conflict environments, looking at how we can master the art of answering to all of you all and our taxpayers, that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing with the funds that you have given to us. And I think over the years in Afghanistan, but particularly I think over the past year with the outbreak of COVID, and really, which has really put a damper on our ability to keep people in country and to be able to travel, that we've learned a great deal. And we've gotten very creative in our monitoring and evaluation. We are employing third-party monitoring. We are triangulating with other partners, with other development partners. We are using tools like satellites and imagery to make sure that schools are being built where they were supposed to be built. And we're using Zoom and other audiovisual platforms to make sure that training is being given and people are present at that training. So I do think that we've gotten better, cleverer at what we do, and we're fairly confident that even as our spaces are restricted, we can reach out and see inside that classroom.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Ami Bera of California, who's the chair of the Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and Nonproliferation for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for hosting this hearing. As I, on both sides of the aisle, Democrat or Republican, there are folks that support the president's decision, but there are also folks that oppose the president's decision. That said, the president's made a decision, and now it's our obligation to execute on that. You see the military executing on it, and knowing the reality of what's happening on the ground, we have a moral obligation to honor and support those Afghans that supported our troops, that support our aid workers, the development workers, et cetera. my home county of Sacramento has the largest number of Afghan refugees and a large number of SIV recipients in our community. When I talk to them, they continue to have family members, others that worked as translators that have applied for the SIV process and have been waiting 1, 2, 3, 4 years to get through the process. They also are very explicit that the Taliban know who these folks are and they will be targeted for assassination. In fact, in the perimeter, we're already seeing targeted assassinations. So, there is an urgency working together with folks like our colleague, Mr. Kinzinger, but Mr. Blumenauer, Jason Crow, Tom Malinowski, in a bipartisan way to move this process forward, to clear the backlog. It's not about authorizing more visas, although we will authorize more visas to meet the mission. It's about speeding up the process. I won't ask the witnesses to talk about this because obviously that's not your area of expertise, but on the record, I think there is broad bipartisan support for us doing the right thing, issuing the special immigration visas and getting these individuals out of harm's way. A question, the scenario that I see likely playing out in Afghanistan is we're already seeing the Taliban consolidating their strongholds in the south and some of those provincial capitals. You're seeing Afghan bases overrun. Certainly, we're starting to see potential consolidation in the north. Ambassador, if that scenario plays out, I think we likely will see refugees start to flow towards Kabul, where hopefully the Afghan security forces can hold out in a fortified city and provide some safe haven. So that's one of the questions, Ambassador, if you could comment on that. And then the second, it strikes me that you said you hope Pakistan does the right thing. But we've known Pakistan all along has been harboring the Taliban leadership in country and protecting them. And again, my best estimation is when they weigh everything, they potentially decide that they've got the relationship with the Taliban, the military has the relationship with the Taliban, that they'll play their cards and go in that direction, whereas Pakistan hasn't always had a great relationship with the Afghan government. So, Mr. Ambassador, if you can comment on those two pieces.
Well, thank you very much. With regard to future military developments, of course, there will be changes inevitably, and there could be progress by one side or the other in different parts of the country, and the South has been an area of special interest to the Talibs. So some changes there, I would not be surprised. But what I am talking about is that the true military means the conquest of the country and stabilizing the country is not a realistic future. That's my judgment. And the disintegration of the Afghan armed forces in the near term is not a realistic option. It doesn't mean that there could not be changes. It doesn't mean there could not be changes that have significant effects, including the problem of refugees and internal refugees, IDPs, or people going outside. And we are, as a country, our government is thinking about all of this and what we can do to be helpful. But there is no military solution to Afghanistan, and that comes to a diplomatic solution and the role of Pakistan. Pakistan has a special responsibility given the factors that you described. And if Afghanistan goes towards a protracted war or a long war, Pakistan will suffer and Pakistan will be blamed for it. General Bajwa and the Prime Minister Khan have said they have changed their policy, that peace settlement is the best. They signed a document or signed their name to a document that the Emirates shouldn't come back. There shouldn't be a takeover by military force. So We hope, we expect, in fact, that they would deliver on those commitments, and we have found the recent engagement between Afghanistan and Pakistan encouraging.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our witnesses, thank you for being here. A couple of things. I would argue that the Taliban believe that there is a military solution for Afghanistan, and that is just simply to outlast our will. And I deeply fear, and I hope I'm wrong, I want to preface all this with that, I hope I'm incorrect. I deeply fear that we are just simply committing this act because they outlived our will. They didn't outlive our technology, our ability to fight. It was just outliving our will. You know, I also find it interesting that when we talked about what is success in Afghanistan, it's, you know, ultimately building an Afghan government and a military that's able to defend itself. And I would argue that we've had some success in that. We've gone from hundreds of thousands, you know, over 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, American troops doing the bulk of the fighting, to today, basically 2,500 that are there to take out counter-terrorist forces, you know, take out ISIS, take out Al-Qaeda, and basically stiffen the spine of the Afghan military who's doing the bulk of the fighting. So while we may not be completely withdrawn, and you have politicians that try to take advantage and say things like endless wars, I would argue that there has been a bit of success. It's certainly not where we want to be. Let me ask you first, Mr. Ambassador, what's our NATO allies' reaction been to this? Because they seem to be much more forward-leaning than we are.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the observation. Of course, there have been positive changes in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a security institutions that it did not have, and my colleague described the other positive developments. But the fact is that despite our efforts in the last 8 years, each year the Taliban have gained ground militarily in Afghanistan. They've controlled more territory. And the trends have not been positive. So that's why more of the same perhaps is not seen as a positive option.
Well,
and the decision was made that it was made. And the 2,500 is there sustainable while we don't have a war with the Taliban. If we went back to war and said we will stay, I don't know whether 5,000 would be a sustainable level of force.
Well, thank you. Look, I'm going to have to take back my time because I only have a limited amount of time. I agree, and I agree. I think my broader point is it's not necessarily the 2,500 or 5,000. It's the fact that the Taliban do see a military solution, and I think, quite honestly, they might have achieved it through that. Our will has been outlasted. Like I said, the decision's been made, and I hope I'm wrong. But let me ask you specifically, when we come to the area of, let me just ask, does the Taliban leadership intend to attack U.S. and coalition forces until all troops have been pulled out of Afghanistan? If they did, would that be a violation? And does that include U.S. Marines defending our embassy in the definition of U.S. forces?
The Taliban have said and that they would like the embassy to stay. We would like to have our embassy, of course, stay, to have a robust, strong embassy, and we will secure the embassy, and I have told the Talibs that.
So, okay, let me ask you then, for both, what is your assessment of the threat level against U.S. diplomats and aid workers that has resulted from the September withdrawal announcement? I can ask both witnesses that.
I believe that the embassy security leadership is monitoring the situation continuously, the RSO, and advising the chief of mission, the ambassador, and the ambassador takes the appropriate steps to make sure that his people, the people under his command and that he's responsible for, are as secure as possible.
I understand. That's not what I asked. What is the current assessment of the threat level? I'll ask the other witness about the, from the USAID perspective.
Thank you, Representative Kinzinger. There are a lot of issues on the threat level or threat assessment that I can't discuss here, obviously. But what I can say is that we all know that we've seen increasing levels of violence over the past several months. USAID, ever since the beginning of when the president announced the withdrawal, has been going through security assessments, which each and every one of its partners. At the same time, we've been going over our security preparations and contingency plans with the embassy as part of the overall emergency action plan process. But we get reports in from the partners in the various provinces all the time, and assess those with respect to whether what level of implementation we can undertake in that province.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
I now recognize Representative Dina Titus of Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being with us today. For the last 20 years or so, the U.S. has put considerable resources into building air combat supply facilities. They're in regional bases surrounding Afghanistan, and they're put there to support the allied forces that are on the ground. We've kind of created this ring of security. I'm wondering, while we hope that a political settlement will be forthcoming, if it's not, based on what I'm hearing here, there's a lot of anticipation that the Taliban forces may quickly look to take over the urban areas in the country. I would ask Mr. Ambassador, what efforts are being put in place to maintain our ability to provide rapid air support or perhaps drone support from areas like Diego Garcia or Qatar or some of the bases in the Gulf area in case the Taliban does strike once we have withdrawn?
Well, as I mentioned before, thank you for the question, that we are going to maintain both monitoring and strike capability in the region and expand cooperation with some of the neighboring states for counterterrorism purposes. With regard to the Afghan forces going forward after withdrawal, we will maintain support for the Afghans, financial support, so that they can pay the salaries of the people in their services, and maintain cooperation with those forces. But that's the extent of the cooperation with the Afghan security forces after withdrawal.
Well, that's not what we've been hearing from some other people who've been kind of reluctant to answer the question about what we're going to do in the area to support those forces. I know we're going to pay the Air Force, but the Air Force within Afghanistan is not all that good once we're gone. But you don't see anything done regionally to back up those forces?
While we will do what we can during our presence until the forces are withdrawn, to help the Afghan forces, including coming to their defense when they are attacked. But once we are out of Afghanistan, direct military support of Afghan forces, such as strikes in support of their forces, that's not being contemplated at this time.
Okay, well, thank you. Ms. Freeman, I'd like to go back to the question of education. I appreciate everybody's concern for girls and women, but we know that young people in Afghanistan have a real enthusiasm for education. But of the 200,000 high school students who take and pass the college entrance exam, only about half of them get to go to college. Once we pull out, how are we going to support the Department of Education and provide greater access for that level of degree?
For your question, with respect to our programs in Afghanistan have looked at both quality and the relevance of developing basic skills, and then onward through the quality of higher education as well. So some of what we've done has been supporting scholarship programs for women and girls, and some of what we've done has been through the in higher education, particularly in science, math, and technology, and then in basic education, a lot of what we've done has been together with other donors through the World Bank to support the educational system and the development of that system in Afghanistan. Both of those are programs that I believe would be very easily continued with in many scenarios going forward. Thank you.
Right. I had an opportunity to visit the American University of Afghanistan. Is that still operating?
Yes, ma'am, it most certainly is. The AUAF continues to operate, and in fact just installed a new president that just got in about 6 months ago, and we continue to work with them on the management of the university itself, which is difficult in the context of Afghanistan, but also on improving the quality of higher education in Afghanistan. As you know, the American University in Afghanistan offers a very different curricula from many of the universities in Afghanistan, and is very valuable to the young people that graduate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll go to Representative Wagner of Missouri next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for their service. The Trump administration took significant steps to end America's longest running war and lay the foundation for a lasting peace in Afghanistan. Much work remains to be done, and it is vital that Congress provide strong oversight to ensure that security in the region remains central to the peace process. I don't want our troops to be in Afghanistan indefinitely, but we must act wisely, consulting with our defense officials and diplomats, and ensure that we are not creating a bigger mess for ourselves in the future. This is my largest fear. After 20 years and more than 2,300 brave Americans lost, we must ensure that terrorists can never again use Afghanistan's territory as a base from which to threaten the United States and its allies. Ambassador Khalilzad, briefly, because I have several questions. If the Taliban continues to flagrantly violate its commitments under its agreement with the United States, what mechanisms remain for the U.S. to push the Taliban to the negotiating table and to abide by commitments to the U.S. post-withdrawal? And has the loss of U.S. military leverage impacted your position in the negotiations, sir?
Well, given the president's decision, the options would be continued support for the Afghan security forces to be able to resist the Taliban, diplomatic pressure on friends, countries with influence over the Talibs to press the Talibs, to not to move forward on things that the Talibs want, such as getting off the list, blacklist in the UN, such as prisoners release, which the government of Afghanistan controls.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a range of non-military options, direct application of military, U.S. military pressure on them that will remain. That's what we would have to rely on.
Has your leverage been impacted? Has the loss, I should say, of U.S. military leverage impacted your position in the negotiations?
Well, of course, the president had two choices at the end. The choice was to make it condition-based, the withdrawal, and to make withdrawal leverage on the Talibs versus a calendar-based approach. It's my judgment the president thought a condition-based approach would mean indefinite presence, perhaps, and therefore opted for a calendar-based approach. And a calendar-based approach leaves leverages that I described earlier in my previous question.
Then, Ambassador, without a U.S. force presence, do you assess that the relationship between the Pakistanis and the Taliban will deepen? And how will the United States respond if Pakistan continues to undermine peace and stability in Afghanistan by supporting the Taliban and providing safe haven for terrorists?
Well, I believe that with the departure of U.S. forces and with peace process being front and center, the positive option for the future, Pakistan's role is vital in encouraging the Talibs to embrace peace. And Pakistan, as you said, has considerable leverage, and we would like to see that leverage used. We have worked positively with the two leaders, General Bajwa and Prime Minister Khan, who have said that they share our objective and will use their leverage. And we expect that that will happen.
Ambassador Khalilzad, should we expect to see a rise in Taliban violence between now and September 11th or after September 11th? What will the U.S. response be if the Taliban resumes attacks on U.S. and coalition forces during the withdrawal?
Well, so far so good on the withdrawal, although the Talibs regarded it as a violation of the agreement, but the withdrawal has happened without significant incident. We expect that to continue, as I said in my testimony, and if we are attacked, we will defend ourselves forcefully, and we have made that clear.
Thank you. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now go to Representative Bill Keating of Massachusetts, the chair of the Subcommittee on Europe, Energy, the Environment, and Cyber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, it's great to speak with you again. A question on something that's been talked about a great deal, but on the special immigration visas, are we, to your knowledge, are we working with our NATO allies? Are they going to be part of helping in this regard? And to what extent is their involvement?
Well, of course, we regard these special visas as important. And we are expanding our capability, as I mentioned before. With regard to our NATO allies, if I understood the question correctly, I'm not in a position to provide any details, but we'll get back to you on that, if you don't mind, Congressman.
That would be fine, but is it safe to say there's a general discussion on that, if members like myself wanted to follow up with our allies directly?
I am positive the allies have concerns of their own similar to ours with regard to people who have worked with them. I don't have the details, but we'll be happy to provide that assistance and to advise.
Please do that. Thank you. Also, in terms of safety issues too, many of the women leaders, in Afghanistan have taken a prominent role. Certainly, we're concerned with the attack on the school that occurred there. Are these women leaders, once we're going, how safe are they? Are there any provisions to protect their safety in that regard so they can't be singled out and targeted?
Well, we can be proud of the role that we have played in empowering women, particularly in urban areas of Afghanistan. Although in much of rural Afghanistan, the change is less dramatic. But with regard to the security of the women of Afghanistan who are in prominent position, of course, that's the responsibility of the Afghan security forces to protect their citizens. Some women have been targeted in targeted assassination, which we have condemned forcefully. But the government of Afghanistan is responsible for the security of Afghan leaders.
All right. Well, thank you, Ambassador. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And next, we'll go to Representative Brian Mast of Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Freeman, Ambassador, you've heard it from almost everybody on both sides, the concern for those that have worked with the U.S. over the course of these years. I think to put it very bluntly, none of us want to see one of those individuals that have worked with us have their head cut off on the internet, and that's a real threat. That's not hyperbolic. So in that, let's get some data points out there. How many principals do you two assess are eligible for the Special Immigrant Visa Program?
We have 17 to 18,000 who have applied. There are the choices that individuals make who have worked with us, that they feel threatened and they would like to leave, and we're expediting processing them. There may be additional numbers. DOD has its own process.
17 to 18,000 have applied.
Or already applied, or in the pipeline, 17, 18,000.
Do you have an estimate for how many more you think are out there that are eligible if they chose to apply?
I do not.
Representative Mast, it's not my province to speak towards SIVs because it's a State Department function, and we aren't really privy to all of the numbers. But the 18,000 that we're referring to are under the Special Immigrant Visa Program. That program covers a very specific group of people who have worked for the United States government, and then there are other kinds of programs out there as well. We are absolutely concerned about our staff, the staff of organizations that we've worked with, people that we know who have been particularly vocal in terms of their activities. And so we're taking every step that we can to work within the interagency to consider all of the options that might be open to supporting the safety and the well-being of those people.
Thank you, ma'am. How many do you assess are out there beyond principals when we add in their families, spouses, and those that are eligible children unmarried under the age of 21? What does that number go to in your assessment?
I do not have an estimate.
Are those estimates being calculated somewhere?
I'll check and get back to you.
Do you think the length of time for eligible individuals for the Special Immigrant Visa Program should be 1 year, 2 years of service or less?
Again, I'm not the best person to make that judgment. I will get back to you.
I'm asking for opinion, sir.
I rather not give an uninformed opinion, so let me get back to you.
I will give you a pass on this, but I would certainly hope that it is not uninformed during the late hour that we are having this conversation already. These individuals, number one thing that they need when they go, number one thing that they need when they go and they have these interviews, speak with the chief of station, others, is to have a letter from HR, commanding officer, somebody identifying that they've worked with them, what efforts are being made, because obviously when we're gone, the ability for somebody to get a letter from somebody else saying that their service has been this for this length of time, what efforts are being made to make sure that they're getting their needed letter from HR so that they can go see that chief of station and move on into the next phase of the process?
We will have to get back to you on that.
What efforts are being made by USCIS in Nebraska, who will be handling these, that's who's handling the caseload on this, to make sure that they have enough assets in addition to the chiefs of station, that they have enough assets to handle the volume that could be expected for the numbers that we're not knowing at this moment?
All I can say at this point, and I'm not the best person on this, is that we're expanding our capability to process requests made under the SIV program, but I'll get back to you. We'll take that for responding as well.
That's a good point there. You know, expanding your capability to process these requests. That's what I'm asking right now. To expand that capability to function appropriately, you need to know how many people you expect. So how are you working to expand that capability to appropriately meet that need for that consulate, for that
Someone in the system may know it. I'm just saying I don't have that number for you, and we'll get it back to you.
Thank you. We'll be looking forward to that information. I yield back.
Thank you. And let me just add, and I know, Ambassador, you're not necessarily the point person on those questions, but I would stress that I think all of us would like to see an answer to those specific questions very soon because the clock is ticking.
Got that. Thank you.
We'll go now to Representative Liu of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm saddened I even have to say this, but because of continuing lies from some members of the Republican caucus, I just need to say the following. 2 + 2 is 4. The election was not stolen. There was an insurrection on January 6th where multiple police officers died, multiple police officers were injured, 140 were injured, some severely injured. Now I'm going to ask some questions on Afghanistan, and I want to first thank the witnesses for your public service. I previously served on active duty in the United States Air Force. I understand how awesome our military is, how wonderful our people are. And what I want to ask is, we've been in Afghanistan for over 20 years, and the best way to honor the sacrifices of all the troops there, including those who died in line of duty and their families, is to understand why we didn't do better as a country. And so my question to you, Mr. Ambassador, is why is it that after fighting the Taliban for over 20 years that we did not win? What are some of the reasons, if you could tell me, the American people?
Well, many books and articles will be written, Congressman, as to what happened, what worked, what didn't work. All I can say is that we did our best in a difficult set of circumstances, the set of challenges that we faced, and the decisions we made in response to them got us to where we are, which is that we have come to a judgment that there is no military solution and that we need to adjust our approach, and that adjustment is what the President has decided on, and I've described to you what we're doing to implement in support of the objectives that I described to make sure our national security interests and our values are looked after in this new post-President Biden's decision environment.
I supported the former president when he wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan. I support the current president who has said we're going to withdraw by September. I agree with you that there is no military solution. I just want your opinion on why did it take us over 20 years to figure that out? Why didn't we figure this out in year 10?
Well, I suspect the very discussions that we are having here were probably the ones that previous office holders and members of Congress engaged in, and these choices are difficult ones, and it has taken this much time to make the choice that has been made, now we have to go forward with implementing the decision and to making sure that we do what's necessary to protect our interests and advance our values going forward.
Okay, and in going forward, you both said in your written statement as well as orally the importance of Pakistan. Now, I'm just curious about what happened earlier this year when there was a major climate summit that the administration held. 40 world leaders were invited, including the leaders of India and Bangladesh, and the leader of Pakistan was not invited. Even though Pakistan, according to one report, is the 5th most climate vulnerable country in the world, even though about 35 of the countries on that list of 40 countries had populations smaller than Pakistan. It would seem to me disrespectful to not have invited Pakistan's leader to this climate summit when the leader of India and the leader of Bangladesh was invited. And now we're asking Pakistan to help us a lot in Afghanistan. So I'm just wondering, what was the thinking there with that sort of exclusion of the Pakistani leader?
Of course, you're right. Pakistan is an important country, and we've had periods of great cooperation with Pakistan. And Pakistan has a critical role to play in Afghanistan going forward and on a number of other issues. As to the climate summit, I'm not in a position to respond as to what decisions were made, but Pakistan participation, I believe, did occur. But if you're interested, we can take that question for a response for the record. But I was not involved in it, so I'm not informed. The most informed person to comment on the invitation, who got invited and why.
Yes, I'd like the response for the record, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Representative Burchett of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the State Department has only issued 50 permanent special immigration visas for Afghans who worked as translators and interpreters to help out our troops. Would you support raising the amount of SIVs that the State Department gives out to accommodate more of those individuals?
I think, if I'm not wrong, we're in principle are willing to do so, but as to the specific evaluation, I'm not the right person, but I can take the question for the record if you would like.
Okay, please do so. And do you think that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda would target Afghans who directly assisted the U.S. and NATO forces?
Well, that's a concern that we have, and I share that concern, but we're engaging the Talibs that these people have qualities, capabilities that Afghanistan needs. This is the time of reconciliation, of agreeing on a roadmap that brings peace, and the record of Afghanistan revenge warfare has resulted in a long war of 40 years. So, yeah, but the concern is legitimate.
Okay. What do you think will happen if the U.S. forces are withdrawn from Afghanistan?
Well, as I say, there are two alternatives I see. Is a protracted war, a long war, which all Afghans on all sides say they don't want, or a political agreement. I understand that's not easy, but that's necessary if they want to end the suffering of their people, of the current generations and future generations of Afghans. Overwhelmingly, the Afghan people desire peace, and it's really a challenge for the leaders on both sides.
Do you think that the Taliban are still primarily a Pashtun force?
Primarily, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now go to Representative Wild of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have questions for Ambassador Khalilzad. My first is this. In announcing the United States withdrawal, President Biden referred to the importance of continuing to vocally support women's rights and to guard against human rights violations. Going forward, what is the United States strategy for maintaining an open line of communication with women's rights and other human rights advocates to inform future U.S. policy toward Afghanistan? In other words, is there a strategy to ensure that at the high levels of the federal government, we are hearing the concerns of people at the grassroots of Afghan society?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. First, that's one of the reasons we're keeping we're committed to keeping a strong embassy presence. Besides our own direct engagement from here with women activists, women leaders of Afghanistan, we also meet and engage women negotiators who have done a great job in Doha. And our assistance in support of women's rights and programs that advocate for the rights of women make progress on those issues will continue. And at the same time, our strategy is to have the women's rights issue one of the key factors, the lead factor in our assistance program in terms of dealing with the future government. That if we've made it clear to the Taliban, we talk to them, and of course with the government, that's a key concern of the United States. And I mentioned it when I talked to the Talibs, I've mentioned it repeatedly, that it is only second to terrorism in terms of U.S. evaluation of its stakes in Afghanistan is the rights of women, minorities, children. These are issues that our leaders like yourself care about, and we have communicated that to our interlocutors, Talibs and others.
Thank you, sir. And a follow-up question. Following the resumption of peace talks this past Friday between the Afghan government and the Taliban during a 3-day ceasefire, how would you characterize the current level of trust between the two sides in the negotiations? And the follow-up to that is, how do you assess the impact of our announced withdrawal on the substance of the negotiations?
Well, the peace talks, the trust deficit is huge, of course. These people have been fighting for a long time, and it takes time to adjust, and there may be differences in objectives besides real differences in opinion of what type of Afghanistan they want. The challenge is, can they find a formula with differences kept in mind that they can live together and resolve differences not by force but by some other formula such as elections. But with regard to the impact of the announcement, there is a concern that our announcement would have emboldened the Taliban and weakened the government side. But I believe that already with the agreement that was signed last year, the issue of withdrawal was part and parcel of that agreement. So in a sense, it shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone, given that the agreement that already had been signed over a year ago.
Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Representative Greene of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member McCall for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. You know, when I first got to Afghanistan, it is a beautiful country. And, you know, I deployed there as part of a Special Operations Task Force, was in country for a good little while, and just fell in love with people and fell in love with, the country. And, but very quickly after getting there, I get out and I get to meet the Taliban in combat operations and see my friends killed and see the Afghani people harmed by this incredibly horrific ideology. And it is a tragedy. It is heartbreaking, and American blood and treasure has stained the soil of Afghanistan, intermixed with the people of Afghanistan for 20 years now. And it's pulling out is very, very difficult. Talking about pulling out is very, very difficult for me, as you can imagine. Nobody wants a forever war. Nobody, especially soldiers. We're the last ones who want to go to combat and stay in combat, but we also don't want an unconditional exit. And I'm not sure that our president has any conditions for the withdrawal other than time and political pressure. And I don't think that's appropriate. You know, I genuinely believe there ought to be some quick reaction force or something in the region to protect the people, to protect American interests, to protect the Afghanis. And I don't know where that can be, maybe Uzbekistan, you know, I don't know. But we have to have a longer term solution that supports, you know, the people of Afghanistan, our friends, and American interests. We have to think very deeply about the fate, and it's been spoken about by many folks here today. The fate of our Afghan friends, those who work specifically with us, especially translators and folks like that. You know, after Saigon fell, 30,000 Americans or 30,000 Vietnamese people who worked with the American military, their names were leaked, and at the fall of Saigon, those people were all executed. Thousands and thousands of others were put into re-education camps, brutally abused. And one of the other things that concerns me is also the proximity to China. I think if there is an open door, we know that the CCP will take it. They will see a strategic advantage to leverage against the United States, and they're going to do it. They're going to take it. So whatever we do has to consider those things. The people who invested their lives with our military men, a great country, the current leadership of Afghanistan, the enemy, the Taliban, and their real intentions and their real heart, and then the fact that China is right there and will take advantage of this situation. You know, my questions really are to either of our witnesses today from a diplomatic angle. What is the feasibility of the United States maintaining a quick reaction force in the region, considering Afghanistan's terrain and the challenges of where the Taliban might fight?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Congressman, for what you said, and thank you for your service. Regarding your question, the administration is committed to maintaining, both in terms of monitoring and response capabilities in the region, focused on protecting our interests on terrorism and the threat to the United States and our allies.
Do you think that the funding that we're currently talking about is going to be enough to support the Afghan military in their ability to withstand the Taliban?
I believe that with the assistance that the administration supports, Afghanistan will be one of the highest recipients of U.S. assistance. So this story of abandonment of Afghanistan is not right. It's just the form of engagement will shift. Combat forces in Afghanistan will not be part of the future engagement, but substantial amount of assistance will be provided.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe my time has ended, and I yield.
Thank you. We'll next go to Representative Phillips of Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to you, Ms. Freeman, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your respective service to our country, important service at that. As you're both surely aware, the 2018 NDAA required that the Departments of Defense and State and USAID develop a joint strategy for, quote, preventing corruption in any reconstruction efforts associated with the United States contingency operations, end quote. And I feel compelled to call attention to the fact that that report was due in June of 2018, and 3 years later, we are yet to receive it. In December 2020, 20 of my colleagues joined me in sending a bipartisan letter to each of the agencies requesting that information on why the delay continues, and we are yet to receive a response. My first question is for you, Ms. Freeman. How would you characterize gains in anti-corruption, good governance, and civil society in Afghanistan, and how stable are those gains?
First off, first time I'm hearing of it, but I'm sure that that's just me. In terms of gains to address corruption in Afghanistan, I will admit that it is a slow roll. The government has changed over several times. People have changed over several times. Where we are having a lot of success is in terms of systemic changes that then build the hardness into the system. And so things like customs improvements, one-stop shops, those kind of things are having a lot of impact, and they have a lot of impact in terms of not only reducing the corruption, but also ensuring the flow of revenue into the government where it's so badly needed in terms of revenue streams for the operations of the government. As we, the other side of the coin, I think, is the civil society, and we've had a lot of success in terms of strengthening the watchdog capability within Afghanistan. People who know what to look for now, who have the capability of calling that out, that they did not have before, and strengthening, the capability within the private sector, CSOs, et cetera, to have stronger systems that guard accountability. That is in terms of financial management and accounting, oversight and whatnot. So we try to do our best to also be an example using multi-tiered monitoring and evaluation. So that they have something to look at in terms of emulation as well.
Okay, I appreciate it. I think it goes without saying that the lack of a DoD IG now looking after things moving forward is going to be terribly complicated, but I want to call attention to it. Mr. Ambassador, you've been at this for some time, it's fair to say. Express to my colleagues the changes you've seen in the Taliban over the last 20 years. How would you characterize those?
The Taliban expressed to me that they have changed while their basic principles remain, that they had come to power unexpectedly in the 90s. They were not prepared to govern, and they did not govern well, that the government was a failure. They have said that to me in so many words. And that they've learned from that, that they don't see a military solution, and that they have to have people who know how to govern be part of the government, governing the future. Now, we're all skeptical, of course, that they may be just sugarcoating what they actually will do, should they come to power through negotiations. Remember, in the agreement that we signed, they commit to a political resolution through negotiations. We will have to wait and see, and we have to be incentivizing them to do what they have committed to do, and also be prepared to confront them with costs should they not. And the jury's out, and we will have to see. But they do admit to things that had gone wrong the last time, including allowing extremists or terrorists such as Al-Qaeda to use their territory to attack us. They have paid a huge price for that. 19 years of war, thousands of their people killed, prisoners in Guantanamo, on the blacklist, travel very difficult for them. thousands of prisoners at home, the suffering of the people in their areas, we don't obviously pay as much attention to because we are obviously very much committed to.
Time's
I
expired.
see I'm out of time, and we all hope they've learned. Thank you, sir.
I hope so as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Representative Barr of Kentucky next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Khalilzad, Ms. Freeman, thank you for your service, distinguished service. Thank you for your insights here today on a very difficult topic. I want to ask you, Ambassador, about President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah specifically. I met both gentlemen in 2015 when I visited Kabul. Regarding the President's announcement to withdraw from Afghanistan, President Ghani has said, quote, and I think just in the last day, he said, we respect the decision and we are adjusting our priorities. In your interactions with President Ghani, did he, or with Secretary Blinken, are you aware whether or not he attempted to dissuade U.S. officials from the withdrawal or encourage a reconsideration of this decision?
No, sir.
What about Chairman Abdullah?
Same.
Okay. Can you provide us any insight regarding what President Ghani or Chairman Abdullah has said to any U.S. officials, whether it be yourself, President Biden, Secretary Blinken, anyone else, what they predict will happen once all U.S. and NATO forces are completely gone? I know you said that the story of abandonment is not right, but I am interested in any predictions that they have expressed or communicated to you or other U.S. officials.
They are legitimately concerned about the adjustment that will be necessary, for example, with regard to sustaining and their forces, since they have been so dependent on us, for example, on the maintenance and operation of their systems that we have provided to them. And we are working on those issues with them and seek to address those. So they do have concerns about the emboldenment of the Talibs as a result of this decision. But they say they have no choice but to prepare to defend themselves, and we have made a commitment to help them defend themselves if the Talibs go the route of a military solution. But both have said to me, and they've said to the Secretary Blinken and the conversation with the President, that they are committed to a political settlement, that this is a new chapter, potentially a new opportunity for Afghanistan.
Let me ask about your conversations with the Taliban leadership. Can you describe their demeanor and attitude at this moment in history? Has it changed? Is there an arrogance or boastfulness about this moment? Or is there what's the tone and attitude? Is it conciliatory or is it aggressive?
It's one of complaining. I think the Afghan culture generally is a culture of complaint. Even the poetry is full of complaint that one doesn't quite achieve what one hopes for in personal affairs even. But in any case, the case of Taliban, the complaint is, as recently has been about three things. One, that we didn't honor the timeline of the agreement, which was to be out by May 1. Two, and they're unhappy about the prisoners not being released, the 7,000 that still are being held by the Afghan government and on delisting. But that has been persistent. I have not seen a change in demeanor as a result of the announcement.
And the third. Well, let me just move on really quickly. Final question, because I'm running out of time. Bagram. As you know, the Bagram airfield, which I also visited, is the largest U.S. military base in Afghanistan, provides a key foothold for the United States in the region. The counterterrorism mission is going to be compromised with the withdrawal from there, but I'm also concerned about giving up the only air base in the world located in a country that is physically on the border with China. I don't see this as in any way helping our situation vis-a-vis China. Will the Afghan security forces be able to hold on to this base? You know, could we, if necessary, how easily would it be to re-enter Bagram if necessary?
Very quickly.
That would be a question you should ask the Defense Department.
I thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Well, that's one way to answer quickly. We will next go to Representative Omar of Minnesota.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ambassador and Ms. Freeman, for joining us today. Mr. Ambassador, both this administration and the last one have been clear in their opposition to the ICC's investigation into allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. I think it is important to point out that the ICC's investigation covers atrocities, crimes committed by both the Taliban and the Afghan government. The ICC never has jurisdiction when a country has the capacity and the will to prosecute its own war criminals. Is it your assessment that the Afghan judicial system has the capacity and will prosecute alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity?
The Afghan judiciary system, and that's not a particular area of my expertise, but from my time as ambassador, when I had oversight of our assistance program, generally there has been positive developments with regard to it, and it's stronger than it was then, but still has a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. And if, as you say, the Afghan courts don't have full capacity to be able to do this, and we oppose the ICC, what should our proposed alternative for justice for the victims of the atrocity crimes in Afghanistan be?
Again, Congresswoman, of course, we want justice and reconciliation for Afghans. A lot of crimes have been committed, a lot of atrocities have taken place. All you have to do is to look at the attack against the school a few days ago. This is this accountability and reconciliation about people who have disappeared is going to be a challenge for Afghanistan for some time to come. They will have to find, as part of their negotiated settlement, an agreement on a process for the future that balances the requirements of justice with the requirements of reconciliation, Congresswoman.
Appreciate that. The previous president pardoned several alleged and sometimes convicted war criminals. Do you think that undercuts our ability to call for the justice you speak of for the victims of the crimes committed by the Taliban and the Afghan government?
Well, this has got to be front and center, one of the issues. I know many Afghans, including the head of the Human Rights Commission, Ms. Shirzad, they advocate that participation in some form by the victims of atrocities and the injustices that have taken place in the course of this long war have a place where they can be heard from, and their pleas for justice can be given an opportunity for the negotiators to hear.
Yeah. And I know that you've taken a huge role in negotiating this deal that will ultimately lead to the withdrawal of the United States, which is something that I support. But we hear a lot of people talk about harms that might be caused to girls and women. Do you think the gains that have been made can be sustained after we withdraw?
The concern is justified, Congresswoman, but I also say that the war imposes huge costs on women, on children of Afghanistan. I have to tell you that I am moved by a story of some very distinguished Afghan who says that he and his wife have two school-age kids, and they alternate sending them to school because they worry that the kid, if they send both to school and something happens, they would lose both of them, and therefore they do this alternating. Yes, we should be persistent in advocating and supporting women's rights, but we shouldn't be of the view that we don't want the peace agreement because of women's rights. No, a peace agreement will advance women's rights, protect their rights, the right to live, the right to send their children to school. But we also should be persistent in our effort that the gains that have been made are preserved and built on.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. We'll go to Representative Stoibe of Florida next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I appreciate your time, and the committee appreciate your time. I was in my first semester of law school when September 11th occurred and the towers were hit. And I, like many others of my classmates and others in my generation, were moved and motivated by the events to serve our country. I graduated law school early. I enlisted. And then I spent about 1.5 years in the infantry. I spent some time after the infantry time in the JAG Corps. And to serve my country in the war on terror, I had the opportunity to serve in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I did not serve in Afghanistan, but at that time, all of us that fought both in Iraq and Afghanistan, we knew what our mission and purpose was. And our mission and purpose was to rid the world of Al-Qaeda and terrorism and Osama bin Laden so that we would not have another September 11th on the American soil ever again, or have Americans attacked like they were in September 11th ever again. We knew what our mission and purpose is. And today we don't really know what our mission and purpose is in Afghanistan. Our soldiers who are there, who are being attacked on a daily basis sometimes, don't understand what their mission and their service is right now. In the intervening years from when I served, in the last 20 years, the United States has seen over 22,000 military casualties, including around 2,400 fatalities just in Afghanistan. Congress has appropriated approximately $143 billion for reconstruction and security forces there. That's more money than the state of Florida has in their entire budget for 1 year, $143 billion. A university study recently issued U.S. costs to date for the war in Afghanistan between 2001 and 2021, putting the total cost at $2.26 trillion. And that number includes DOD and civilian agency costs in Afghanistan and Pakistan, a portion of DOD costs since 9/11 above a baseline amount, veterans' medical and disability costs, both from a physical standpoint and from a mental health standpoint, and interest costs on war-related borrowing. We're seeing 22 veterans a day commit suicide, a lot of them who serve there and have mental health issues or PTSD because of the things that they saw while they served there. I supported President Trump in ending the forever wars. I supported President Trump by putting a date certain for U.S. forces to leave Afghanistan on May 1st. I supported that, and I'm disappointed that the Biden administration is kicking the can down the road till September. The only argument that I have heard on the other side of this is we need to have a stabilization force to prevent terrorism from coming into our land. We have shown recently by the attack on Soleimani, by the attack recently in Syria, that the U.S. military has the capability, if we need to strike all across the world at any point in time. We don't need to have soldiers there who are continuing to get hurt, who who are continuing to be killed when we're spending the amount of money that we're spending in Afghanistan. I don't know what we're telling these soldiers right now, what their mission and purpose is. I can tell you that the mothers and the fathers of these young men and women who are killed or who are maimed or who are injured while they're serving there, it's very difficult to explain to them why exactly their soldier is stationed there and what exactly their mission and purpose is. It's time to bring our troops home. I support President Trump and May 1st. I support the Biden administration, although I do not support them pushing it. We need to bring our troops home. Our Americans and our money and our service members should not be in Afghanistan. There's no strategic purpose for us to be there. If we need to strike and there's terrorists that we need to strike with, we have the capabilities to do that. It's time to bring our soldiers home, and I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now go to Representative Spanberger, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank my colleague from Florida for his comments. I found them very interesting to listen to, and I appreciate them and what he shared. And so, Ambassador Khalilzad, I would like to begin with a question based on some of the recent comments from some of my colleagues. Certainly, over the past years, we have seen so much sacrifice, nearly 20 years of sacrifice of our service members, our diplomats, our intel professionals, and Afghans on the ground, those who have chosen to help the United States as translators, as supporters in provision of information and support to our efforts. But I'd like to begin my question with at a starting point. You had mentioned in a prior answer that there was some irritation. I don't remember if that was the exact word that you used, but some irritation that the United States wasn't abiding by the May 1st timeframe. My colleague mentioned certainly President Trump's intention to have us out by May 1st, that commitment, and the Biden administration's now plan to have us exit Afghanistan by September. Could you speak a little bit to just for a bit of history, the discussion related to that May 1st timeframe? What went into those discussions? Certainly it wasn't an easy decision. And then ultimately, moving forward, what is your engagement in terms of planning for the September or the withdrawal by September, excuse me?
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman. Of course, as you know, as a result of over a year and a half of negotiations with the Taliban, we came to the agreement that we did, which was a condition-based withdrawal by May 1st of this year of the U.S. forces. But with the change in our election, the change in administration, the new administration did an intensive, very comprehensive review as to what it should do in Afghanistan and what it should do with regard to the agreement that it inherited. That took time, several weeks, and as a result, the president made the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, but to complete that withdrawal by September 11th, as you know. The process has started of withdrawing the forces that remain there. Progress is being made. So far, thankfully, the withdrawal has been uneventful. But the withdrawal will take place, and it will take place within the time frame, obviously, that the president has decided.
And Mr. Ambassador, as the United States withdraws the military, certainly it will remain very critical for us to continue with our engagement diplomatically and for us to remain supportive of economic development in Afghanistan and the region in general. Could you talk me through a little bit, certainly here on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I think this is highly relevant to all of us, how the U.S. government can ensure the safety of U.S. diplomatic personnel? Can you also discuss how the State Department is potentially envisioning a strategic update to its diplomatic engagement in Afghanistan, given the changes that we're seeing on the ground with U.S. military engagement, really a general overall landscape. I know not all of that falls into your purview of work, but any comments about how we can really ensure the strength of those diplomatic relationships, I would appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. A decision has been made to maintain a strong embassy, and a decision has been made to ensure the security of that embassy. And the embassy is critical to the implementation of the agreement that the Talibans have made. There is provisions for economic assistance post-peace in Afghanistan, and that the Taliban would like. And that requires an embassy and an oversight of that assistance. We have communicated to the Taliban that we will maintain an embassy, and they've agreed to that, and that we will secure the embassy. Obviously, there will be changes with regard to the mission adjustments, and I've described what our objectives will be going forward and how we will pursue them from Afghanistan and from outside. But we are committed to a partnership, a new chapter in that partnership with Afghanistan, doing all the things that you mentioned, Congresswoman. And Afghanistan remains important to us, just the nature of the partnership will change. No active military forces in Afghanistan, but otherwise we're committed to the same objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Representative Pfluger from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member McCall, for holding this hearing on a very complex issue. And I think a lot of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle have described their concern for the Afghan people who have helped the United States and NATO troops throughout the past 2 decades. And so I would also like to state for the record that I have those same concerns, and I look forward to seeing the responses, in writing to make sure that we do take care of those folks through the CIV program. The other thing I think that's important is this is a complex issue. We're facing 2 decades of conflict in a region that that has seen religious extremism, that has been host to global terrorism, that has a number of regional threats. But it's important for the United States, as we make this tough decision, but as we make it and as we execute it, that we do stand with the Afghan people, and especially those who have partnered with us for so long. And I think it highlights the need right now for the United States to stand strong with Israel as well during the time of turmoil. But my questions are going to be focused on the region, and I'll start with Ms. Freeman. What has Iran's response been to this decision? And do they see it as a potential is a sign of weakness or something that they can take advantage of?
I think in terms of the region, I'm really not equipped to answer on the issue of Iran. Zal may have some sense of that. We've certainly been working in the region of Central Asia and then down through Pakistan to try to build up the connectivity within the region to bolster the chances for peace within the region and create greater connectivity there. But I'm afraid that I'm not equipped to answer on the front of Iran.
Well, for Ambassador Khalilzad, do you see the Iranian government benefiting from this? The lack of access, overflight, and basing that's been highlighted with Bagram Air Base is a concern. What are your thoughts?
I suspect it's a complex reaction. Iran has got mixed of motives. On the one hand, it probably is unhappy about the U.S. departure because it provided Iran some leverage to make life difficult by supporting elements that are hostile to the United States. They believe that our presence provided them with some leverage on us. But on the other hand, Iran has said that it wants the U.S. to force to withdraw from the region, including Afghanistan, but perhaps under different circumstances. We worry about the Iranian encouragement of attacks against our forces as they withdraw. We are paying close attention to that. Iran would seek increased influence in Afghanistan, no doubt about that. But it has
Do you think that we're going to be prepared to counter that that increased influence, the malign influence especially?
We need to remain engaged and supportive of the peace process, of engagement with all Afghans, especially and those that have worked with us, as you said, and competition for influence, for shaping the future, a more peaceful Afghanistan that's at peace with itself, has good relations with the neighbors, moves towards regional and economic integration is what we have embraced, and we should remain engaged and pursue the strategy that I outlined. That would be the most effective counter that we could pursue.
In my last 30 seconds, thank you for that. The relationship with Pakistan and what effect do you see on our relationship with them and writ large as the region evolves?
If Pakistan plays a positive role in the peace process, cooperates in terms of counterterrorism in this new environment, there is a normalcy in relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the regional integration of Pakistan, South Asia, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. That could be, we've talked a lot about the negative potential consequences of the decision that the President has made. We haven't talked about opportunities that this decision could make, especially if there is peace for South Central Asia coming together. Economically, development-wise, this will be good for our relations with Pakistan, and obviously for economic development of Pakistan. But we have to see what happens in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now go to Representative Houlihan from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys really well for coming today. And my question touched many people with some questions that have already been asked, and specifically a concern about the future of women and girls. Certainly a lot of my colleagues have shared those concerns across the aisle. And Ms. Friedman, when I was in—
Chrissy, we're having trouble hearing you. If you could—
Is that better?
Yes, it's better.
Excellent. Okay. So, Ms. Friedman, when I was in the room with you all, you were mentioning some of the necessities of evolution due to COVID, of how you were able to assess the effectiveness of the development work that was being done in Afghanistan. You said that COVID had forced your hands to sort of evolve in making sure that that development aid was being assessed effectively. What part of the development and aid that you are working with is particularly vulnerable to regression post the United States withdrawing? If you could comment on the things that you're most concerned about.
Thank you, Representative Houlihan. It's a tough question, and one that I would ponder quite a bit. I think as we look at the issues going forward and our vulnerability under stress, as it will be, that I worry a bit more about perhaps the efforts to maintain systems and keep those going. At the same time, I think that we've got strong partnerships with the government and through the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. So I think that they will hold. but they will be critical. It'll be critical for us to make sure that that there are basic services, that we ensure that food security and really the capabilities of the government to provide those services. So I think that at least in the as we are watchful, that we'll look to really concentrate our efforts in those areas, make sure those things do continue and support the Afghan people, so that they know that.
And so when you're saying that you're concerned about, systems being upheld, are you speaking to the traditional IT systems? Are you speaking about relationships and the kind of human systems that you have established? And you mentioned food security as sort of your first concern. Is that where a lot of your anxiety lies, or are there other places? And what should we be doing to address the fact that these are the things that you're concerned about?
I'm talking about the systems in terms of the network that keeps those things going. So in terms of keeping the markets going to embrace food security, making sure that that the supply chains and whatnot work in order to keep the health system going, and those are the kinds of things that I think. One, the requirements are our staff are continuing to have our staff there. Two is the continuation of funds flow through those systems. And then the one that's not under our control is the security situation in the country.
Yeah, I worry about that as well.
Yeah, I do.
My next question is for Ambassador Khalilzad. One of the things that we've been talking about before the announcement of the withdrawal was making sure that there was inter-Afghan dialogue as part of the peace process. How can we as a Congress be able to continue to play a role in supporting a democratic Afghanistan post the United States withdrawal? How can we be continuing to ask for a continuation of a productive inter-Afghan dialogue as we leave the country?
Oh, thank you very much, Congresswoman. I think the role of Congress is obviously vital. Through assistance program, through messages that you send, through engagement. The administration is committed to encouraging, using our diplomatic and other relations and influence that we have to serious negotiations between the two sides, and inclusive negotiations in which Afghans are represented in the negotiating teams, all Afghans, including women, and we've worked hard to make sure women are at the table. And negotiations need to be more serious. We've gotten the UN to become more involved. We're working with neighboring countries. I reported on all our efforts diplomatically to encourage a political settlement as the only option for a lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan. And we will do that, and anything that Congress requires, obviously in terms of our reporting or engagement by Congress, we're very much open to it.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Representative Meyer of Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our expert witnesses here today. As a former Army veteran and someone who served in Iraq in an intelligence capacity with the U.S. Army, I'm very concerned about the fate of the local nationals who helped us out. The Special Immigrant Visa Program has long been neglected by the State Department across administrations, especially as we are eyeing an exit to Afghanistan and have that plan. We need to make sure we are addressing that backlog. So I want to associate my comments on that subject with several of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And Mr. Ambassador, I understand this isn't directly within your wheelhouse, but I hope you will continue to reiterate this within the administration. Now, getting to the more core topic of our briefing today, Mr. Ambassador, how much confidence do you have in the leadership of President Ashraf Ghani?
Well, I work closely with the president and with his team. They are in a very difficult situation, and they are dealing with it. It's not an easy job. The challenges of Afghanistan I'm very familiar with. Yeah, he has a tough job to do, President Ghani.
And how would you, I guess, just, it's only been a few weeks since we saw Alipur and Maidan Wardak, challenging the government's forces, the Tanzims in the region, both kind of local power brokers and some who've gotten integrated, the former Northern Alliance commanders who are currently integrated into the government, whether in Kabul or at the provincial level. I'm very concerned about what that looks like post-September, when the U.S. is not able to be as closely aligned and monitoring and frankly adjudicating some of those tensions and disputes. Has there been a discussion about how much U.S. support, whether to the ANDSF or pro-government militias, how that support will be divided between both the Kabul-based government versus more local power brokers at the provincial level?
Well, you raise an important point, Congressman, which is that going forward, it'd be very important that the key leaders, both nationally and regionally in Afghanistan, come together. Unity will be needed in confronting the challenges, and in terms of also negotiating a better agreement with the Taliban if the Afghans on the other side, the Republic side, are united. And I am encouraged by some of the reports about the potential announcement in the coming days of a united leadership or state council that would help on questions of war and peace. The Talibs probably, as part of their tactic, would like the fragmentation of the current political leadership or the political forces to deal separately with each. And their unity will be also important to keep the security forces together. It's a military necessity too, given the composition of the force. So we are encouraging political unity. We are emphasizing it, and I'm happy by the reports that I hear.
And yet, obviously, this is something that the United Nations, which has long had a presence in Afghanistan, has been attempting to shepherd as well. And obviously, we're dealing with several different negotiating tracks, right? You have the UN-led negotiations, you have the U.S. To the Taliban negotiations, and then the intra-Afghan negotiations as well. What support, if any, do you see the U.S. providing for continuing UN-led negotiations to try to effect a political settlement?
We have emphasized increased UN role in the negotiations to complement what's going on in Qatar and what Turkey initiative of co-convening with the UN and with Qatar, the conference. Actually, the peace negotiations, there are initiatives under consideration, but a key part is the negotiations that have been taking place in Doha, now next Turkey, and bringing the UN in more to assist, given its convening powers and given its expertise with regard to ceasefires, elections, constitutional reforms, all the issues that are likely to be front and center in the coming period in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I will now recognize myself. And let me start by just asking you to confirm something I think is true, and that is that even with the withdrawal, it is still the policy of the Biden administration to do everything we can to ensure the survival and success of the Afghan government and security forces?
Yes, sir.
Okay. With that in mind, a critical element here, and you alluded to this, is that the Afghan security forces depend on our contractors, particularly to keep their aircraft and helicopters in the air. I want to ask the administration's latest thinking on what we can do to ensure that that capability is maintained. It's still the case that the Afghan government can hire contractors with money that we provide them. Is that your understanding?
That is. And I have to say that our Department of Defense, General Miller, they're working with the Afghans to, this is an area of concern, naturally, for the Afghan government to find workable solutions for the...
you agree this is critical?
It is very critical.
What about ISR, reconnaissance information that we may have? Obviously, we're leaving behind providing weapons, funding for the Afghan security forces. What happens if we pick up information about, say, the Taliban massing troops against a population center? Can we share that with the Afghan security forces?
I would ask you to, maybe in the proper setting, ask the Department of Defense about this.
You would agree it's a critical question?
It is an important question.
Thank you. Lots of questions about the special immigrant visas. There's the broader issue of other Afghan civic leaders, women's rights activists, human rights activists, journalists who may at some point feel threatened. I take your point, we don't want to encourage a panic by suggesting everyone has to leave now. At the same time, I trust you'll agree that we don't want to say to these people that they have to stay until the last possible moment, and when the Taliban are at the gates of their hometown, then they can apply for a process that takes 4 years. Would you agree it would be in our interest to set up some kind of new hybrid system in which folks in those categories could, in effect, begin their paperwork, begin their vetting now, even if they haven't yet decided that they need to leave Afghanistan, so that they feel they may stay and yet still have a way out if that becomes necessary?
A balanced approach is needed, yes.
Okay. And that would require some new procedures that the State Department would have to put into place.
It might. I'll take that on to get back.
Good. I'm glad we agree on that. I'm going to have to be a little tougher on you on a couple of other things.
Okay.
You mentioned, Ambassador, in response to a lot of questions about women's rights, that women in Afghanistan want peace too. They want the right to live. Aren't you, in effect, saying that women are going to be killed by the Taliban if they continue in their pursuit of their education? That, in effect, you're suggesting that they have to accept this reality if they want peace?
No, I'm not saying that. I would not say that. No, I'm just saying that when we talk about women, often we talk about them as if they were kind of only concerned about the issues that we talked about, but they have concerns about the future of their country. They have concern about the war. Yes, they are obviously concerned about their achievements, and they would not like to lose those.
Well, yes, but that the contradiction is there precisely because the Taliban is threatening to kill them and others if they continue to pursue an education. I know you said there was only, some parts of the country. I'm sure you saw the New York Times story a few days ago about what's happening in northern Afghanistan, where everywhere the Taliban is taking power, girls are shut out of schools. We also have, as you well know, the Taliban responsible for ongoing assassinations of civic leaders, of journalists, of judges, of all of the people who have envisioned a different kind of future in Afghanistan. How is that consistent with the Taliban potentially choosing the right answer to the question that you posed of wanting respect in the international community as against simply power in Afghanistan?
Well, they can have power through negotiations, and they can have power perhaps by military force But depending on how they achieve power and how they exercise power, there will be responses. And we have made it clear ourselves, we have made it clear with our allies, we have made clear jointly with allies and ourselves in terms of principles for future assistance that they say they want, and that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, well, they may say they want assistance, and yet for the last 20 years they have been fighting to erase the very things that our assistance is designed to build in Afghanistan. So, well, not sure if that's exactly leverage.
Well, the fight of the congressmen, they say they fought us not because of those reasons. They fought us because they saw our presence as occupation of their country by a foreign force that had come from far away to occupy them.
We'll continue the debate next time. And I will now yield to Representative Castro of Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. The United States went to war in Afghanistan and against the Taliban in response to the tragic attacks of September 11th because of the Taliban support for Al-Qaeda,
right?
The terrorist entity that attacked us. I think we need to think about the original goals of the war,
right,
to prevent another attack by Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups against the United States. So, Ambassador, does Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan still maintain a goal of attacking the U.S. homeland? And does it have the capability to do so? Does the Taliban similarly share Al-Qaeda's goals to attack the United States or our allies?
Well, with regard to Al-Qaeda, I don't believe their goals have changed in terms of attacking the United States, but I believe their capability from Afghanistan to do so, thanks to the great work that our military and security organizations have done, it's much diminished. And part of the deal with the Talibs, the agreement with the Talibs, is that they would not allow any terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, specifically mentioned, to use the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the United States or our allies.
And does the Taliban share Al-Qaeda's goals to attack the U.S. or our allies?
No, I do not believe so.
Okay. In terms of the February 2020 agreement, does it allow for a scenario where the Taliban is able to keep their commitments on Al-Qaeda and counterterrorism while also continuing to attack the Afghan state and still be in compliance? And how can that lead to a stable Afghanistan?
The agreement did something historic, Congressman, which is to open, for the first time in 40 years, direct Afghan to Afghan, warring Afghans to negotiate it with each other. And the agreement specifies a commitment to a negotiated settlement. Now, the negotiations did start. It has been very slow. We would like to see it accelerated, but it's ultimately up to the Afghans, the two sides, to overcome their differences and agree on a formula for the future of their country. Our withdrawal now is independent of that. The President selected a timetable-driven withdrawal.
I want to ask you a little bit about that withdrawal, Ambassador. You've served as ambassador to both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
And some members are understandably drawing parallels between the withdrawal of troops in Iraq to what is now happening in Afghanistan. Why will this withdrawal from Afghanistan be different from the withdrawal from Iraq? And what lessons has the United States learned that can be applied from the Iraq drawdown to Afghanistan?
Well, the two countries are different and in different phases. I'm not saying we won't face challenges in Afghanistan going forward. The war could intensify. The war, there could be negative developments in Afghanistan, but I do not believe that this sectarian conflict in Iraq, which our withdrawal resulted in the government behaving in a more sectarian way, the government at that time, and that in turn helped the rapid growth of ISIS in the country. We naturally decided that that was a threat to our security as well, the growth of ISIS, and we had to react. In Afghanistan, it's not sectarian, it's the conflict. And there is actually the fight against ISIS is something that the government and Talibs have in common. The Talibs are the one of the worst enemies of ISIS. So it's one of the things that should encourage positive negotiation is their cooperation, potential cooperation against ISIS that they could do, rather than seeing ISIS as an element of a fight against the other side.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.
I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Representative Jacobs of California.
Well, thank you both for being here and staying till the end so us freshmen get to ask some questions. I have the privilege of serving on both this committee and the Armed Services Committee, so I've been following this issue and the communications around the peace plan very closely. And I want to say first, I'm very encouraged by the administration's decision to withdraw. I think it was the right decision. I represent a proud military community, and I think it is the best way that we can honor the sacrifices that they've made. However, I'm still concerned about the prospects for a viable peace deal. We know that there are a lot of challenges remaining, including getting the Taliban to go to Istanbul, moving the needle on a potential Afghan interim government, full cooperation with Pakistan, etc. So, Ambassador Khalilzad, how do we overcome these many challenges to produce a sustainable peace plan?
Well, we just persist in using all the tools that we have in our toolbox to make progress, appeal to their self-interest to begin with, use our leverage with them, what we have in the current circumstances to encourage accelerated negotiations and encouraging positive support for that negotiations from Pakistan, as you mentioned, that's one of the countries with influence and leverage over the Taliban. And of course, work with the Afghan parties, both the Talibs. We're in a unique position that we have a partnership with the government, and we are also one of the principal interlocutors with the Taliban. And there are things Taliban want from us, and that provides us with leverage as well. They want prisoners released from the government. That provides the government with leverage. They want delisting from the UN and our delisting. That's leverage as well. So, yeah, I don't have, I wish there could be a magic solution that we could turn things quickly around, but the war has gone on for a long time. People have gotten used to it. Some profit from it. And so you can count on us to be persistent in pushing and using the leverage and the toolbox that we have.
Yes, well, I do appreciate your persistence. I want to drill down on this question of Pakistan. In an interview on the 14th, President Ghani said that peace will be primarily decided by the region, and it's about getting Pakistan on board. And he said, and I quote, "The U.S. now plays only a minor role. The question of peace or hostility is now in Pakistani hands," end quote. That is quite the statement. And I share many of my colleagues' concerns about the reliability of Pakistan as a partner in this. And I know you have expressed optimism that they will step up. And I was wondering if you could speak more about what specifically you're going to do to push their leaders and ensure that they do step up the way we want them to.
President Ghani is right in the sense that the region is important for a peace agreement to bring stability, lasting stability to Afghanistan. It needs broad support inside. The diversity of Afghanistan, men, women, ethnic, needs to be reflected and supported, have support, but also the region. Because part of Afghanistan's problems has been, it has been kind of a scene of regional proxy conflict. And so therefore the role of the region is important, and we're trying to build regional consensus as part of the international consensus and support for peace. And this economic dimension that I have emphasized repeatedly, the potential connectivity and trade between Central Asia, Afghanistan, and South Asia is vital, in my judgment, is a vital part of the future of that region and for Afghanistan. Now, but also important is one shouldn't absolve Afghans of their responsibility. And they have to come to accept each other and find a formula of, where they can resolve their differences. And on Pakistan, General Bajwa and the Prime Minister have recognized, in my view, that this economic benefit is where the future is. General Bajwa has said, countries don't develop, regions develop. And I know there are challenges inside Pakistan, but I believe this last visit was positive that General Bajwa had to Kabul. They have discussed some steps that the two sides will take. We're working with the United Kingdom in support of the effort that the relations between these two countries improve. That relationship has been the Achilles heel of Afghanistan's recent history and needs to be overcome. We will see, but we're hopeful given the recent developments.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And then finally, we will go to Representative Manning of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Khalilzad, I want to go back to the issue of women and girls in Afghanistan, something that so many of us are very concerned about. I was surprised to hear you say that the withdrawal to date has taken place without major incident, and then acknowledge that on May 8th, a girls' school in Kabul was attacked with 3 explosives that killed 85 people, including female students, and wounded 147 more. I do understand that the Taliban has blamed the attack on the Islamic State, but according to the Wall Street Journal, President Ashraf Ghani blamed the Taliban for the attack. We have grave concerns about what will happen to women and girls, and this attack does seem to be consistent with the Taliban's belief about the role of women and girls. Do you have clear information that it was ISIS and not the Taliban that blew up that school?
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman. And I share your concern about the future of women and girls in Afghanistan. And when I said without a major incident or withdrawal so far, I meant with regards to the attacks on our forces. There has been concern that given some of the statements that some Talibs had made, that perhaps these forces could come under attack. As far as the school is concerned, what I can say in this setting, Congresswoman, it's likely to have been ISIS is likely to be the one who attacked that school.
But do you have any specific information to back that up?
Given the setting that we're in, that's all I can say, Congresswoman. We believe that it's likely to be ISIS who did the attack.
Can you tell me what efforts are being made to protect schools where girls are being educated and the girls who are seeking an education, and what protections will be in place in the future?
That's, of course, the responsibility of the Afghan government. It must take steps to protect its citizens, particularly, as you mentioned, if ISIS is seeking to attack, do dastardly attack that gets a lot of attention and that undermines the peace process, polarizes Afghanistan along sectarian lines. It has been the Hazaras and the Shiites that have been mostly targeted by the ISIS in Kabul, and that it is the responsibility of the government taking all of this into account to provide for the security of its people.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My last question I want to ask about, a lot of us have talked about our concern about this slow nature of the processing of the special immigrant visas. To either of our witnesses today, is there anything that can be done to speed up the processing of those visas to make sure that people aren't caught up in the line of fire as things move forward?
Thank you for that. We share that concern. The chair has raised it also, and the chairman and the ranking member. And we are expanding our capacity to expedite consideration and issuing of SIVs. And I've taken it on to provide further details about what we are doing in written form.
Is it simply an issue of manpower, or are there other issues?
I'm sure a part of it definitely is manpower, and that's why we've expanded that. We've added more people to. There may be also other issues in terms of information and how they could be acquired, but we will provide in writing details as to what the issues are and what we're doing about them.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the conclusion today. So I'd like to again thank our witnesses, Special Representative on Afghanistan Reconciliation, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, and Acting Assistant Administrator for Asia at USAID, Karen Freeman, for their testimony today, for their patience and their service to our country. As we've heard today, there are different views about whether we should have left Afghanistan on both sides of the aisle. This is bipartisan, multi-partisan, but I think there is something close to a consensus that you're hearing from a lot of the questions today about the need for realism, about the need for honesty about what we're dealing with here, about the nature of the Taliban and what they are fighting for and what we are likely to face if the government of Afghanistan is not able to hold on. We all hope for peace, and we all wish the peacemakers success, but our policy should be based on a realistic assessment of what might happen rather than on magical thinking. And I hope we can all find agreement on that. So with that, thank you again, and this hearing is now adjourned.